Oh, I don't know why everything is so choppy right now. I'm just hoping my computer doesn't crash afterwards, during this stream, but should be fine. Yeah, so welcome back. It's time for part 2. This is when we're actually gonna get into the nitty-gritty. So I'm assuming that by this point, if people are watching this, then they've already cleared out most of the normal and technical dungeons. So we're basically gonna be moving on to dungeons that actually hit you back. Because that's a little bit harder to work around. So until now, we've been focusing on basically making sure that your team is something that is suitable for beating dungeons that are basically the equivalent of punching bags. But once you get to the mid game, the enemies start. Oh, okay, sorry for that. Yeah, I don't know why my computer is not able to handle this. Oh, we're back. So, let's see if this works. Okay. Yeah, so last time we basically covered the early game. We basically covered exactly my reasons for why someone might be interested in playing pad, and we basically went over that in the slide. And then afterwards, we basically went over the early game, including basically the mountain of resources that a player is basically given at the start, basically what to do with them, what to do for a very starter team where the enemies don't really fight back, basically the fundamentals of basically how a card is organized, including how to make it more powerful and what it does. And then we also went over basically some things that you should keep in mind when you're working with a limited box. And basically who to roll for and whether or not you should reroll, which ended up being it's entirely dependent on you if you want to reroll or not. But there's no real need. How to solve boards with the basics over here of solving 6x5 boards with different team types, including just regular combo, rainbow, rose, and two-prong attack teams, so TPAs. So we went over that, and then at the very end we basically went over a very small list of dungeons that you should clear, which included normal dungeons and technical dungeons, so that you can actually start unlocking some of the more interesting dungeons out there. And then there's also the weekly dungeons, which is basically mandatory for every single new player to run because it gives you a bunch of evolution materials so that you can help improve your monsters. And then we also went over story dungeons because they also give you a ton of they give you a ton of resources that will greatly benefit you when you're starting out. And on top of that, they're also basically fixed team dungeons, so it's not relying on your box at all. For every single floor that you enter, you're basically given your own team to work. You're basically given a team to clear the dungeon with, so yeah, it's basically accessible to everyone so long as you have the stamina for it. So that's basically one of the reasons why I highly recommend starting off with story dungeons, because you get like 40,000 pluses, or like 50,000 pluses in total. You get like 1,000 tamadras, and later on you can even get rainbow medals, which are actually incredibly useful, and so on and so forth. So it's not something that you really need to rush, but it is a good idea to clear story dungeons as you have stamina. And also because they vary greatly in how much stamina they cost, you might also be able to just fit in a couple of these before you go to bed or something like that. Just as a quick little way to burn off some stamina, you know? And then there's also, for Pad Pass holders, you should also make sure to clear all your daily Pad Pass dungeons, and also to make sure you have and also, Pad Pass holders are basically able to run any type of descent that they want at any time, so they don't have to wait for the like the daily rotations for descents. So if you need like a specific Evo material or something like that, then you can always... Then Pad Pass users are basically able to clear them as needed. So for those players, like the normal, the weekly dungeon thing doesn't really apply to them because they can just run them whenever they want. But it's just yeah, it's just even for Pad Pass players, you should be doing that anyways because there is a specific tab. If I go into Pad over here. Over here on the top right hand corner, there's an achievements tab. Let me just grab my free stone. Over here, in this tab over here at the top, there's basically like a set of missions that you can do. The game basically keeps track of like a bunch of different statistics, including what dungeons you cleared and which ones you haven't. And one of the more important things that you can get from this is in the Maniacs tab on this first dungeon over this first tab over here, which is Awoken Badge Team HP plus 15%. This is one of the most commonly used badges in the game, and it's basically universally good. So there's basically no downsides to this, and a lot of teams basically rely on this to meet HP threshold. So it's very important that you try to slowly work your way towards getting progression in this specific thing for this specific badge. It's very, very important. Because the badge that gives us team HP right now is only like 5%. That 10% actually does make quite a big difference. So in order to make any progress with this, you're basically going to have to play this game a lot by completing special dungeons, which is basically just dungeons in a special tab. So you're going to want to clear as many of these as you possibly can, whenever they come up, especially the ones that are limited time. Things like Experience of a Lifetime you should always be clearing before days expire, just because it's also a free stone on top of getting rank XP. But there's also things like the dungeon that gives you... because we're in the middle of an event, there's also the dungeon that gives you like a pixel android guy. Let's see. I don't know where he is. I'm hoping I didn't sell him by accident. Oh yeah, here, the puzzle droid. So basically try to clear through as many of these as you can. Especially the ones below the Tamadra infestation over here. These, actually, no. The ones below the gold dragon infestation, like the ones below this. Yeah, the ones below the Tamadra infestation are basically dungeons that go on a rotation. The daily ones are basically, as they say, they rotate daily. So, this one will basically rotate between Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like weekday and weekend dungeons. And the one below that it basically just rotates between different types of gold and jewel type dragons. And the ones below that are basically descended dungeons that go on a rotation. So these ones are basically going to be the main source of your special dungeon completions. Because you never know exactly when they're going to show up again. If you find a dungeon that you need to run, for example, Shiva Dragon Descended is a really common one for a lot of players. You will want to try to focus on clearing those if you don't have Pad Pass. Pad Pass players basically have access to all these dungeons at any time of the day, so those guys are exempted. But for everyone else, it is a good idea to keep track of some of the more important ones, like Shiva Dragon Descended. There's also like Odin Dragon, Raw Dragon Descended. There's also things like Whale Door. If you need skill boost, there's a whole bunch of different dungeons that you might want to clear, but in the end, you're going to be clearing every single one of these anyways, if anything, just for the free stone. A lot of these dungeons have basically been power crept to hell and back, so for most of them, so long as they're like mythical plus to mythical level difficulty, if you have a proper Swiss Army knife team, you should be able to tackle most of them. Most of them. There will be exceptions. And there's also the... were you late? My PC crashed, just like last time, for some reason. That was my bad. I have to remind myself to restart my PC before I start one of these streams. But anyways. Yeah, so another thing that you might want to keep track of is... another thing that you might want to keep in mind is the fact that these difficulty labels, like Extreme Annihilation, Annihilation, these things are misleading somewhat because Gung-Ho refuses to stay consistent with them. A lot of the older dungeons are fairly consistent with them, but recently, with the newer events and stuff like that, they started labeling these event dungeons like expert and novice difficulties, but these have far higher stats than typical novice and expert dungeons. Typical novice dungeons would basically have monsters with like sub 1000 HP, but the monsters in these dungeons have like hundreds of millions of HP. It's not the same. But for most of the dungeons that you're going to be encountering, the difficulty labels are more or less accurate. Everything basically mythical difficulty, and lower, including like legend and expert and master. Those ones you should be able to clear fairly easily with any semi-decent Swiss Army knife team. And going beyond that, there's 2 dungeons over here, just below the collab dungeons. These ones are also on rotation. They rotate between attributes, and they're really nice because you can actually S-rank these dungeons. And S-ranking them basically gives you like a handful of rewards, but the most important things that you can get from them are Trigod masks. They also give a diamond dragon fruit, and they also give you a rainbow pea, which are all very useful items to have as an early game player. And yeah, so these are basically the things that you might want to focus on. And these permanent collab dungeons below also have S-rankable difficulties as well. So if you're, for example, if you're trying to look to skill up like your Odin dragon or something like that, you'll find that it's basically has a max level of 21, which is the equivalent of getting like 10 rainbow peas. That's fairly expensive for new players, especially before you get, if there's like no event exchange for like peas or anything like that. So in that case, you might want to pay attention to whatever dungeons you can S-rank. Yeah, and we also went over the various different ways that you can skill up your characters before, by basically running the skill up dungeons, using peas, or feeding monsters with identical skills, but yeah, the most common ways that you will skill up units in today's meta is basically through the use of peas, and also to just run the skill up dungeons. Skill up dungeons are the most stamina efficient just because you can skill up to like 5 different units at the same time. But yeah. And another thing that we didn't really cover was at the very bottom over here, just Master of Dragons training. It does give you a handful of rewards, and it teaches you some of the basics of the game. Some of them. So it's just worth clearing out just for the freestone as well. And Endless Corridors is also a really good place for you to basically just test run your team. It costs 0 stamina to run, so you're just free to go wild. Just if you're bored, just enter that and just start puzzling. Just practice, practice, practice. Quick question, how do you feel about the One Piece collab? I feel like if we don't get the One Piece collab, which we probably aren't going to, it's gonna be kinda sucky, but we've been in similar situations before where a major meta refining collab basically just skipped over us. But the way that Gung-Ho basically handles those situations is basically by power creeping our Godfest exclusives instead, at a slightly faster rate. So in the end, it's gonna suck not being able to roll for not being able to roll in one of the units with some not being able to roll in one of the collabs with the most fun units, like Luffy, for example. But it is what it is. We'll find a way, as we always do, as we have in the past 10 years. But yeah, it's not getting One Piece is actually kind of a really big blow, because One Piece is one of the collabs where you can actually make fully endgame teams using exclusively One Piece units, so it's one of the collabs that are really good opportunities for new players to start out in, but we'll make do. And the whole making do process is basically why I decided to make this guide in the first place, because it's not all doom and gloom just because we don't get a single collab, you know? So anyways, yeah, moving on, let me refer back to my guide. So we went over all of that stuff in the early game and the why you should play Pat section, so the next reasonable step that we should be going is in the mid-game. Actually, no, before I go there, let me just give a quick note on my progression. I'll also give some tips over here as well, based on my findings. So I did go over a bit of a brief on this on, I believe it was like Tuesday when I last streamed Pad, but I'll do a quick recap of it anyway. So last week, Friday is basically when I started this account, and we basically rolled in Sanrio. I traded for an LJKD because Rainbow is just super easy to build around. And then I did Experience of a Lifetime, and I started clearing a whole bunch of dungeons. I used Kirimi-chan to basically just steamroll my way through a bunch of the normal and technical dungeons that don't have many mechanics. And I also, and every single day, every single weekday, I've basically been doing the weekday dungeons to get myself a nice fat supply of evolution materials as well. And then, yeah, I made sure to basically run the collab dungeons. I farmed it so that I could get the equips from token exchanges. I did 8p dungeons so that I could get coins and the free rolls and the extra stones. And then this is when I started trying to make my Algae Kitty team by slapping pieces together. And then I also did monthly dungeons. I didn't do all of them. I only did expert level 6 and all of novice just for the rainbow medal and also for the bunch of snow globes and the 10th anniversary medal for 10th anniversary commander for the 100,000 monster points. And 2 days ago there was Odin Dragon Descended, so I threw together a team that was able to clear it, and I'll go into more of this later because this is an interesting scenario for our new players. And I'll also be doing like a case study on how I built my Odin Dragon team from scratch using my team. I'll go through the thought process, but we're going to be going into that very soon. And yesterday was basically the start of a new month. We got 100 free stones, and it was the start of a new Godfest. So this account basically has been exposed to 3 different special realms so far. First of them being Sanrio, second of them being the Heroine Gacha, and the third being this ongoing Godfest. So for new players, even though this might not be like the absolute best Godfest, you should still roll in it anyways, just because any option you have is a good option. There is not much value in waiting too long for like the more ideal Godfest to come as a new player, just because you're at the luck of the draw anyways, and not only that, there's no point in crippling your box and your personal enjoyment by not getting a couple of rolls in early, because any roll that you get right now basically expands your possibilities greatly. So it's always so as a new player, I would honestly prioritize trying to get in as many Godfest rolls as you can, especially because they can also be fodders. A lot of Godfest exclusives are really good for equips or just straight up being used on your team and etc. Now, one interesting thing is this wasn't always the case, because several years back, modern team building back then basically relied heavily on collab units and limited units and stuff like that. So to the point where it wouldn't be uncommon to basically see like 10 to 12 of the units in every single team basically being exclusively collab units. But nowadays it's generally like a pretty decent mix between farmable and like gung-ho like permanent units like Godfest and stuff like that, and a mix of like key collab cards and stuff like that. So yeah, the situation used to be a lot worse, but the game definitely has been going in a direction where like evergreen units like Godfest exclusives are basically showing their face a little bit more, and gung-ho is making sure that the power level is almost equal between Godfest exclusives and collab units in a lot of cases. Like Godfest exclusives generally get buffed into relevancy like not that long after a major collab or something happens, because they still want people to roll for the latest and greatest of power creep, right? But yeah, these high rarity Godfest exclusives almost always catch up in power sooner or later. So that's a very nice way that this game is going. And there was also the Puzz Droid for free. Oh yeah, I basically just dumped like 100 free stones on getting my 10 rolls into Godfest, and this is basically what I got. There are standout units over here, like for example, this Blackbird and Noctaria are all really good rolls. Paimon is also a really nice catch, but we don't really have the team for them, so we're just gonna put them in the back of our minds because I can't really use any of them right now. So they're good rolls, but for me as a player right now, they're basically worthless, so we're just gonna hold on to them. Well, I got 10k channel points and I did 3-minute IOs. I'm not going to. I will refund it. Don't do it. Let's see. And this is basically the 7th day of the, 8th day of the account, and 8th player opens up, so I'll be doing that later, probably off stream. And Friday Dungeon and Arena for a Dragon, I need that for, yeah. So these things I'll actually explain later, because this pertains to my current team that I'm working on right now. So let's basically shimmy on over into the mid-game section. So mid-game is basically what I consider to be like the arenas and descents, and at this point in the game, this is when you're going to be introduced to the dungeons that will allow you to be able to fully max out your cards. So this is when you get access to easier dungeons where you can farm Ps for skill ups. This is when you can start stockpiling pluses. This is when you can start getting latents, and you might want to start slapping them onto your units and whatnot. So this is when the game actually begins, basically. No more one combo swiping through like normal and technical dungeons where nothing really hits you back. This is when you start encountering mechanics. So welcome to the mid-game. This is where you're going to want to start tackling more challenging and longer dungeons, such as the arenas. These dungeons typically take over 30 plus turns to complete due to sheer number of stages and mechanics you'll need to go through. Although you were able to get away with just leader skill activations, the enemies are going to start to fight back with their own attacks and debuffs. To counter this, you're going to want to make a team that has a variety of tools to work with. So on top of all the requirements from the previous dungeon, from the previous teams, such as having an easy-to-use leader skill, plenty of move time, and enough skill boosts to basically have your transformations and important skills up on early, here's some other things that you may want to bring. So hazard resists, ways to avoid basically ways to avoid like different types of absorptions and avoids, and cleric type actives so that you can basically cleanse like awoken binds and stuff like that. So it's a small list of additional things that you're going to want to bring, but trying to fit them into your already limited space can be challenging, but at this stage of the game, when we're basically trying to make a generic Swiss Army knife team, it's not that bad. So first of all, let's begin with hazard resists. So awakenings and super awakenings and equips and badges are the most common ways that you will get resists. So let me just zoom in a little bit further. We only have to see like one column at a time. So awakenings and super awakenings are the best ways to get hazard resists because many units provide full resist to certain hazard with a single awakening slot. This is talking about things like we're basically talking about the big X, the big orange X versions of these resists, the resist blind plus, jammer plus, and poison plus, because these basically void the enemy's attacks completely, whereas these small dinky little ones basically only have a 20% chance of blocking them each additively. So if you're going to be using these, then you're going to need to fit 5 of them on a team, at least 5 if you want full resists. But if you don't, if you can't afford it, then and your dungeon and your team kind of relies on not running into certain things, like for example, if you really don't like dealing with blinds but you can't find a way to fit in like 5 of these into a team, bring as many as you can, because it's still like a decent chance so long as you can put like 3 or 4 of them on a team. Granted, your consistency is gonna go down, but if it's important that you clear a dungeon, and if it's like crucial to it, then it's better on banking on a 60% than a 0, so. Do make sure to bring that along with you. But you're gonna try to want to maximize these as much as possible, because if you start to compromise like 60% here, 60% there, then eventually it gets to a point where you might only have like you might only have a chance at a successful run every like 1 in 4 runs. And if it gets to that point, then you're gonna start molding because you're gonna end up running out of stamina really fast. So try to be smart with your team building so that you bring all the hazards that you need. And getting resist through badges is also a last resort tactic, because there are almost always better badges that have no direct replacements, such as the HP++, which I alluded to before, which is the one with the 15% bonus team HP. There's a mass attack badge, which is also really useful for like rainbow teams. And plus 2 to 3 seconds of move time, depending on whether you have Pad Pass or not. Because you never know, right? And also do make sure that you have 100% skill bind resist in most teams, but this usually isn't a problem as most units come with 1 or get 1 post-transform. And there's also many equips that also provide multiple skill bind resist awakenings too, and badge can also get 50% resistance if needed. Now, I put in a asterisk right next to the hazard resist because there are certain teams that don't rely on needing certain types of resists. For example, if we're gonna be looking at a I did not want to close. Why is it closing? Okay. Anyways, if we go back to here, Algae Kitty teams basically loop their own actives so that every single turn you can generate a new board. So this means that okay, I think it may have been BlueStacks lagging on my PC, or it might also be my VTuber model as well, so I'm just gonna turn that off for now. And yeah, because I'll turn on BlueStacks as needed. I think I don't need my instance of pad. I think the only thing that I really need is basically pad DB. So I'll just open that up, and then we'll just go off of this for now. Yeah. It's a little bit unfortunate, but we're gonna have to make do. So sorry about that interruption. So where was I? So we were basically covering over the different types of hazard resist. So the thing, so just going back to my example with Algae Kitty. Let's see. BlueStacks. BlueStacks. Nope, that's the wrong window. DB. There we go. So regarding Algae Kitty teams, they basically have actives that generate a fresh board for them every single turn. So the only way that you could get jammer or poison boards, the only way that jammer and poison boards would actually be able to affect you would be if they basically came in through Skyfalls, but in the case of Skyfalls, you would need to bring Surge Latent, so bringing the actual poison and jammer resist would basically serve no purpose on these teams. So Algae Kitty teams are one example of a team that can basically ignore them. Another example of a team that would be able to ignore them would be something like Ferule, where its leader skill basically voids poison damage entirely, and its active skill also generates enough orbs for it to activate its later skills. And also provide damage for the entire team. So there are examples where you don't need to bring every single hazard, and there's also the fact that many dungeons don't really throw all different types of hazards at you, but in this case right now, because we're trying to build a generic Swiss Army knife team, just keep in mind that you're going to want to bring as many resists as you need, but you don't have to bring every single one depending on your team and what kind of leaders you're using. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Like another really common example is Shiva Dragon teams almost always don't need to bring poison and jammer resist as well, but it's generally a nice to have. But if you're working with spinners or if you're working with Leo, Shiva Dragon and Leo basically creates enough hard and basically creates enough fire, red and like heal orbs to cover most of your screen anyway. So in those cases, you don't really need to bring resist as well. Jammer resists it might actually be pretty handy for in the case of bombs, but poison resists maybe not so much. But it's really team dependent on what you're bringing. So, and the reason why that's really handy is because a lot of times if you're running like a lot of transforming units, such as Algae Kitties and stuff like that, your assist slots are kind of restrictive because you can't really bring actors on top of them. But anyways, that's another topic that we might have to cover. So yeah, I'll make a mental note to cover the different types of assists depending on your team. So it's another way that you can think about team building because it narrows down your options, which can make it easier for you to come to a decision on what unit you want to bring and which ones you might not want to. So the other thing is ways to avoid attribute absorption, void damage absorption, and pierce damage void. Now, different teams have different ways of dealing with these mechanics. For example, Algae Kitty teams pretty much have VDPs built into their kits through their looping actives. Brick teams can ignore damage absorption through latents and stuff like that. So various different teams have different ways of dealing with these absorptions and damage voids and stuff like that. So You're gonna have to think about which ones your team does not handle easily and try to work your way around them. So even, like, for example, even though I mentioned that brick teams can ignore damage absorption through latents, that means they still have to deal with things like attribute absorption and more commonly damage absorptions. I mean, not damage absorptions, pierce damage voids. In those cases, like for example, Shiva Dragon teams would typically bring over a unit like Alchemist or something like Ultraman Trigger, so that they have a low cooldown active that can pierce damage voids, because these teams will not run VDP Awakenings because it's going to be very difficult to incorporate them into a board. Like getting a VDP and a brick is almost impossible to get consistent, so yeah, in a lot of cases you're going to want to use actives to basically get around it. So actives are the most straightforward way of tackling anything that your team can't easily handle. In the case of arenas, it's not a bad idea to either bring multiple equips or have a low cooldown way of tackling a variety of things at the same time through a unit like Tiara, Beach Mariel, or All Might. If you're running rainbow teams, a popular option is to pair with a unit like Great Witch of the Fresh Snow Reach, or Great Witch of the Ice Flowers Reach, which can cover both attribute and damage absorption continuously. And rainbow teams can also choose to run VDP latents to pretty much ignore the mechanics so long as you match 5 attributes and heal every single turn, which you pretty much should be doing on rainbow teams anyways. And though it does come at a slight damage loss over taking double damage cap latents, the peace of mind of not having to bring over VDP actives can make your runs go a lot smoother, basically. And it also frees up an active slot, and there's basically no active that lets you do VDP on a single turn cooldown, so there's that as well. And another way that you can tackle attribute absorbs is to position your units in your team carefully. So damage from your team is calculated ping by ping. For example, like this. Where one ping is basically one attribute, and it's basically like whenever you match orbs, all the damage numbers that you see are basically individual hits on the enemy. So pings are calculated left to right, starting with your 6 main attributes and then your 6 sub-attributes if you position your units so that you have a lot of damage of the same add in your final sub-attributes. In many cases where you're overkilling everything, you can ignore all attribute absorbs other than the ones that are trying to absorb your final attributes. So for example, in this particular team with Algae Kitty, you're basically free to ignore everything that's basically a non-light attribute absorb. And yeah, so you're basically free to ignore every non-light attribute absorb, and you can also ignore pretty much all the pierce damage voids, the VDPs through Algae Kitty actives. And when it comes to void damage absorptions, we have Tiara on a 3-turn cooldown that we can basically just pop whenever we need. So this is basically the ways that you would round out a team to basically be able to tackle every single one of those hazards. And it's very important that you have a solution for every single one of these, especially for Swiss Army Knife teams. Now, I will mention though, Swiss Army Knife teams are generally going to be used for running shorter dungeons. So if you have an equip that can cover like 2 or 3 of these hazards, they're totally fine to run on your team if you bring like 1 or 2 of them, and that's usually enough to cover all the annoying bits in a dungeon. Because you would rarely find a dungeon that has like multiple attribute absorptions like back to back when the dungeon's only like 6 floors long. So yeah, the main goal of a Swiss Army Knife team is basically, it's not going to necessarily be to tackle arenas. Though if you build a decent enough Swiss Army Knife team, you will be able to. The main goal of a proper Swiss Army Knife team is basically going to be... I mean, my bad. Okay, so let me rephrase this. Your Swiss Army Knife team, if built properly, will be able to tackle most of the arenas. But the main goal of this is basically going to be building a team that will let you tackle as many different varieties of descended dungeons as possible. Because you're going to want to make progress towards your 50% HP patch. And there's also the fact that a lot of these descents and stuff like that are required for you to have get evolution gems so that you can further work on your teams. So even if you're basically like theory crafting these teams, if you can't build them, then there's not much point in that, right? So it's very important that you have a team that can tackle as many possible descents as possible. And last but not least, you're gonna want to try to bring a cleric type active, so things like bind clears or typically awoken bind clears and unmatchable clears. Now, a lot of these are usually bundled into one single unit. One popular example being Odin Dragon, a 4-turn cooldown, cleric active clears every single one of those things that I mentioned. So it's usually up whenever you need it. And there's also, from the Heroine Gacha, there's also Aura, which is with the BGM unit, also a pretty nice unit. Also 4-turn cooldown, clears the same things, but it does a lot more damage personally, so yeah, there's pros and cons to basically every single unit. So bind clears, firstly try to prioritize having bind resist on all of your characters. If the dungeon has a lot of binds, you're gonna want to save your cleric type actives for awoken binds and not necessarily for clearing away just regular binds. So if possible, what a lot of players will do is if a unit has no good super awakenings, then oftentimes they might have like bind resist to instead. But usually there's better ones, but so in those cases where there's better super awakenings to bring, such as like a high hitting damage active or something like a skill boost, in those cases you might want to bring over an equip that provides the bind resist anyway, so there's that. And Awoken Bind Clear, there's no way to avoid these without using actives to counter them, but thankfully there's a lot of low cooldown options for these nowadays, coming out at 4 to 6 turn cooldowns. And having one cleric as a base unit oftentimes means you can reuse it during the dungeon with little worry of not having it up again without needing multiple cleric actives. So needing multiple cleric actives used to be a much more important thing in the past, when we didn't really have actives at this low cooldowns. So several years back when we were first building teams for the new arenas and stuff like that, when they first came out, most units would basically have active cooldowns that were anywhere from 5 turns to like 10 to 12 turns. So you would have to plan out your actives very carefully, so that you would basically stagger your actives so that you would be able to use the inherited active first, and then somewhere down the line in the middle of the dungeon you would be able to use the base unit's active to tackle a different mechanic. So it was a much harder puzzle to put back together back then, when you basically had to account for 12 different actives that you would stagger throughout a dungeon. But nowadays, the focus in team building has basically shifted away from timing your active skills to more bringing the right tools for the job. Because nowadays, it's not very weird to see a team that basically has all of its active cooldowns be like under 5 turns. For example, in this Algae Kitty team, Algae Kitty, like post-transformation, Algae Kitty, 3-turn cooldown. Fire Dragon Tyranno is 4-turn cooldown. Odin Dragon, 4-turn cooldown. Tiara, 3-turn cooldown. Dark Raw Dragon, 2-turn cooldown. And Algae Kitty again, 3-turn cooldown. So the modern team building experience is basically making sure that you basically have an active to counter most of these annoying hazards. And you basically... modern pad is a lot more reactive. So you have basically like a toolkit that's basically filled to the brim with like short-turn actives. So whenever you need to use it, you would basically have that tool ready to use, or you would basically time your actives so that it would be up whenever needed. Because a lot of these endgame dungeons basically throw out like annoying elements at you like back to back. So it's all about timing, but the timing is more skill dependent, more than dungeon dependent at this point. So a lot of the focus has basically been shifted over from team building difficulty from what I feel to what is essentially like you need to, if you have the right tools for the job, it's way more skill dependent on how you actually pilot the team itself. Yeah, so there's that, and unmatchable clear. TPA-based teams can opt to bring one unit with unmatchable clear latent, as it provides both damage and can clear unmatchable orb statuses. But most other teams will end up relying on actives to clear these. Many cleric actives have the component included in their actives anyway, so it's not a big issue in some cases. There can also be awoken binds and unmatchables in quick succession, so in cases like that, you may want to bring a second unit that can provide unmatchable clear and some other form of utility as well. So it's not unthinkable to have a unit that basically provides unmatchable clear along with like an orb changer or something like that, or maybe it extends your time or something like that. So yeah, unmatchable clear is oftentimes just put in alongside a bunch of different things. So in those cases, you might want to bring one of those units as well. So for a general Swiss Army Knife team, I would recommend bringing like 1 or like 1.5-ish, I guess, of a cleric type active. But generally with modern team building, if you have an awoken bind clear that's on like a 3 to 5 turn cooldown, it should be sufficient for most cases. And general things to keep in mind, having a team that covers all these elements will give you what I call a Swiss Army Knife team. It's heavily generalized and can tackle a wide range of content, including most arenas and dated content. Because a lot of stuff that's basically been released over a year ago is able to be beat with a Swiss Army Knife type team like this. So to put into perspective, like I believe it was a year ago where MD2 came out. Most of the dungeons before that, before the Mystic Dimension dungeons, are capable of being beat with a pretty solid Swiss Army Knife team. With the exception of some of the later Shiras. But it's not very difficult to build a Swiss Army Knife team that can tackle Shura 1. And yeah, Alt Shura 1 as well. It's mostly Shura 2 where it gets a little bit hairier, but a pretty solid Swiss Army Knife team like this one is probably enough to handle it. So Swiss Army Knife teams are not very good at endgame dungeons because endgame dungeons usually require a different set of usually have a different set of requirements, and one of the hardest requirements to meet with a Swiss Army Knife team is HP. So when you're throwing this much utility onto a team, one of the first things that you're probably gonna forego is basically having a ton of HP. But also many endgame dungeons don't have every type of hazard, so in some cases you can get away with not having a certain type of resist, not having any skill bind resist, or even bind resist at all. You should research the dungeon you'll be tackling before you team build for it, but with a solid Swiss Army Knife team, you can basically throw yourself at a dungeon until it fails, and basically only start making substitutions and edits from there on. So a lot of endgame dungeons basically have like specific HP thresholds that you're gonna want to meet. But this team kind of throws it all out. But it's completely fine for a lot of dated content because a Swiss Army Knife team like this is still tanky enough that they can essentially handle like 800,000 damage hits and above. So they're still really solid because a lot of the dated dungeons don't really hit for like 6-figure damages and stuff like that. So yeah, if anything, you can basically just stall out a lot of the annoying mechanics when it comes to a pretty solid Swiss Army Knife team like this. So no need to worry about that. Pretty much anything that's annihilation difficulty and under, you should be able to either stall. You should be able to tank like every single hit in those kind of dungeons. So basically, if your tier is not up on time, then you should be able to tank like 2 or 3 turns for you to be able to get it back up and use it, or you might be able to just stall out some of the more annoying things. So there's always there's a lot of flexibility. Like these Swiss Army Knife teams are, because they're heavily generalized, they're not going to be the fastest for most of these dungeons, but they will be able to clear it, and that's basically what's important. Especially when you don't really have the resources to invest in too many different types of teams. Having one solid Swiss Army Knife team is going to make your life a lot easier. And that's basically what's going on with me right now. I'm building this Algae Kitty team, and without it, I would be in a much harder time trying to get things like evolution materials and stuff like that. So yeah, it's quite important having one team that you can basically just rely on for a lot of the easier contents. It's also because like it's not really a problem right now for a lot of new players, but for endgame players, you're gonna find that you kind of run out of team slots pretty easily. Because you're gonna want to have like one specific team for a lot of like one specific endgame dungeon. And in cases like that, having one Swiss Army Knife team that can basically tackle most of the older content or like an event dungeon, whenever it comes up, is going to be extremely nice for being able to save a lot of team slots. So endgame dungeons usually have teams tailored to them, so it's not a common for an endgame dungeon to have most of their team slots occupied due to having one specific team for every dungeons that you like to farm. This is actually one of the reasons why I recommend Pad Pass for late game players, so you don't have to rebuild teams repeatedly. And you can easily circumvent this by farming one dungeon a lot, so you don't need to return to it, but that's a different kind of investment. So for example, if you know that you're gonna be farming like MD4, for example, for Big Bang, then you might farm it like 100 times, maybe skill up one Big Bang or something, maybe have a couple of extras that you can evolve into, and just be ready to like just P the rest. But in those cases, you can basically just run that team until you're bored of it, and then afterwards you can just not run it again. So there are ways you can get around it. Pad Pass, build, name, and save team. Yeah, and one other thing is, like if you're using PadDB, label your teams. Like Cadenza MP, Odin, Dragon, Ascended. This is basically what I did for mine. Label your teams, and just come back to it later. And you can also, on PadDB, you can actually add in text by hitting this button on the top left. So if you basically copy the team over from like a YouTube video or something like that, just stick in a link to that YouTube video or something in the description so that you don't forget. That's basically my recommendation. Yeah, so Pad Pass, build, name, and saving teams are basically all just very important. So, and let's basically start doing case studies. So this is a Swiss Army knife team that I basically designed with my limited box that I have. And I'll basically go step by step explaining my thought process, starting from the top down. So my thought process over here, it's missing a T. My thought process over here is identify a leader and core subs that would benefit it the most. So in this case, I started with Algae Kitty because I knew MP Dragons were pretty accessible for new players now that we have 4 million MP for clearing normal and technical dungeons. They were an easy include. And Tiara is also another lucky choice. Without her, I would have opted for something like Aurea or Reach Kitty instead, but to get more attribute coverage and counter dungeon mechanics. So because I rolled Tiara, yeah, so because I have Algae Kitty and I ended up rolling Tiara, I basically decided to build around that instead. And yeah, so the leader is gonna be Rainbow Kitty, Algae Kitty. So Rainbow teams are kind of meta right now and are very flexible and easy to work with due to not having specific attribute requirements other than needing one of every attribute on your team. This gives you a ton of flexibility in who you decide to bring compared to teams that are locked down to specific attributes or types. Now, Algae Kitty is also a new unit at the forefront of power creep with an extremely loaded kit that allows it to ignore multiple hazard types, such as jammers, poison, and orb blocks, while also providing an extremely high personal damage. And so that's basically the reason why I chose Algae Kitty. And as for the subs, 2 of them were locked down from the very beginning, and those ones are Tiara and Dark Raw Dragon. So Raw Dragon, as I did not opt for a third Algae Kitty, I needed some way to finish the system where I would be able to create a fresh board every turn while also unlocking the board. Raw Dragon allows me to do this while providing very high personal damage, and it unfortunately does not have VDP every turn like Algae Kitty does, but for a farmable replacement that also covers Dark Attribute, it is extremely powerful. Algae Kitty's auto recovery from its leader skill also basically makes up for its 1 HP self-nuke. So that's basically a non-issue on this kind of team. Now, another thing to mention is, because Raw Dragon is on a 2-turn cooldown and Algae Kitty is on a 3-turn cooldown, you can basically use Raw Dragon like this. You can use Dark Raw Dragon into Algae Kitty, into Dark Raw Dragon, into the other Algae Kitty, and go back and forth like this. So that whenever you run into a unit that has VDP, that requires VDP, you can actually chain Algae Kitties back to back in 2 turns. So if, like, okay, so if a unit requires VDP and has a super resolve so that it needs 2 turns to die, by cycling your Raw Dragon every other turn like that, you basically make it so that if needed, you can use 2 Algae Kitties back to back whenever. So that's basically like my little tip on how to time your Raw Dragon usage. You don't have and because it's on 2-turn cooldown, you don't have to go Algae Kitty, Raw Dragon, Algae Kitty, Raw Dragon. you can just go Raw Dragon, Algae Kitty, Raw Dragon, Algae Kitty until you need 2 turns of Algae Kitty, and then you can basically just use them back to back. So that's one tip for running a team like this. And those were basically the core subs that I decided on. Tiara also providing extremely high personal damage as well, and also being like the Omni Void that this team needs for attribute absorption and damage absorption. So the next thing is fill out the rest of your team slots with what's needed for team functionality. So now that your core members are assembled, there might be a couple of bits and pieces here and there that you might be missing in this team. And in this team's case, it's going to be complete attribute coverage. So Tyrannos is here to cover for that HP. And yeah, and HP is also another concern in some cases, which may be shocking considering how this team can tank 837,000 damage. So a shield active on a low cooldown unit would be a nice touch, and that's basically why I brought the Julie Brooch. Oh yeah, so yeah, Tiara. So I rolled multiple copies of Tiara, but I'll only be using 1 or 2 copies of her. She provides insane amounts of personal damage while also being an active that allows me to ignore damage absorption and attribute absorptions on a 3-turn cooldown. And you rarely end up running into those into units that require this like back to back. So that's also why that it's nice to have like 1 or sometimes 2 copies of her. 2 copies is kind of pushing just because of the attributes. How difficult it is to fit in attributes. But you can work around it by running double Tiara and changing their sub-attributes to be the ones that you're missing. Like, for example, in this case, if I were to run double Tiara, I would be having 1 Tiara replace the Fire Dragon Tyrannos, and I would simply just swap one of the Tiara's sub-attributes to be Fire Attribute End. Although that team won't be able to enter all attribute required dungeons, because that awakening only takes place after you enter the dungeon itself. It should be enough for most other things. Yeah. And Odin Dragon, one of the most versatile farming units, providing farmable units, providing up to 7+2 skill boost and a 4-turn complete cleric ability. It also has a decent amount of HP, and its personal damage is more on the low side. It doesn't really matter. Please don't tell me I'm gonna crash again. I didn't want to close this. Please. If I crash again, maybe I'll delay the stream to another day, but no, I think it's fine. Yeah, so Odin Dragon is another really flexible farmable unit. It's actually a unit that I would recommend a lot of people try to build towards, if possible, because it just fits into a lot of team, and when you don't have options to a lot of different cleric type units, it can really save your butt. Okay, I think that was an internet issue, not necessarily my... Yeah, I think that was an internet issue, not necessarily my computer crashing this time. So those are the 4... That was basically like the core units that I decided on. Basically starting from that order, from the top down. I started with Algae Kitty, then I knew that I need to finish a system, so I included Raw Dragon. And then I knew that I needed some way to deal with all those, like... and then I needed some way to deal with all those attribute absorbs and damage absorbs and stuff like that. And I also needed a cleric type ability, so I chose Tiara and Odin Dragon. Yeah, hopefully it goes a little bit better when I upload the VOD, but yeah, it's quite a lot of issues. I'm not exactly sure what's causing these. It might be this diagram app, but it might also just be my Canadian internet. I think it's Canadian internet, honestly. I think these apps aren't really handling these disconnects properly, and that might be one of the reasons why it's kind of crashing out like that. I did notice that I'm losing a lot of frames. Yeah. So hopefully the VOD is gonna be a little bit better. Okay, so yeah, I didn't realize I was dropping 20% of my frames. My bad, guys. So yeah, the next step of this, so the next step in building the team is basically filling out what's required. So that's basically going to be attribute coverage. My team doesn't really have options for getting fire attribute coverage. Like my box is almost empty when it comes to fire department. So I decided to go for a farmable option instead, and I opted to get Fire Dragon Tyrannos. Now the interesting thing about Fire Dragon Tyrannos is the fact that this guy is actually like really good for rainbow teams, surprisingly. The reason being this guy is capable of taking 10 3C, so his personal damage is pretty high. And on top of that, this guy basically has killers for some of the more relevant units, unit types typing as well. Dragon, God type, and Devil types being like super common. So this guy has personal damage multipliers of up to like 500 times, with a decent attack as well. 3000 attack is nothing to scoff at. And I'm not sure why they decided to include it, but this guy also has a guard break. So this guy is really solid for rainbow teams in terms of personal damage for being a farmable unit. The biggest downside to a unit like Fire Dragon Tyrannos is the fact that he only has 2 skill boosts, but if you're able to make up for it with other sources, or if you're using a unit or a team that has low turn transforms instead, something like Tiaras and Algae Kitties that have 20 turn cooldown transforms, then a unit like this would fit right in. And although its active is kind of bad, for a team like this, it's actually perfectly fine, because 1.5 times fire attribute attack for 4 turns and fire attack 20 times attack on all enemies. Now the fire attack of 20 times is fairly useless, but the 1.5 times fire attack can be used to basically override attack debuffs, which is probably the main way that this active would ever be used, if not just for holding on to a better active, such as Julie's necklace thing, which would give me 50% defense for 2 turns just in case of a panic attack. Yeah, just in case of... Yeah, just in case, just as like kind of like a panic button, it's always just good to have a shield if possible. And there's also the fact that many endgame bosses will basically have a very strong attack lined up once you take them down to like 50% HP. So an equip like Julie, where you can get like a shield, can basically let you tank that pretty easily. So and after that, and once you have your main unit slots filled out like that, the next step is basically pondering equips depending on dungeon requirements. So for a Swiss Army Knife team, this is basically means prioritizing getting full hazard coverage for everything that you can't easily deal with. In this case, it's going to be blind, clouds, and tapes. And for specialized endgame dungeons, I'd like to take equips that would either counter specific floor mechanics, or let the team meet higher HP thresholds or even bring in more utility in the form of damage, because faster clears means less healing needed, and basically the more clears you can do per hour, because nobody wants to basically spend too long on a single dungeon. Yeah, because sometimes it turns into like more of a mission if you end up if you're trying to farm like an endgame dungeon for its materials and drops. There's a huge difference in convenience between a team that takes 20 minutes to clear and 13 minutes. And that's basically why tier lists exist, because many of the teams in those endgame, many of the teams that are listed high up in tier lists are generally ones that are super consistent and also really fast. I'll just stall 99 turns. I've done that before. Because I was, yeah, just out of spite. I did that in, like, Hanuman Descended, I think. It was one of the dungeons. It was one of the annoying ones. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of other people have done the same. Okay, so... Yeah, and for the equips, I decided that I wanted to prioritize getting Blind, Cloud, and Tape Resist, as LJKT teams benefit rather heavily from those resists. Blind is more of a quality of life thing. You could technically just map out your whole board and just like solve it on paper and then just replicate it again. Or just memorize all the blind orbs and then just solve around them. That's totally fine too. I do that actually. And there's also Cloud and Tape Resist, which are more annoying. Cloud especially is more annoying and it's more optional, but Tape Resist can make or break your leader skill activations if you can't actually solve the board properly, right? So in those cases, like, getting Tape Resist is important, much more than Cloud. So, and Jammer and Poison Resist are useless because you start with a fresh board from popping actives every single turn, and non-resistible hazards only come from Skyfalls, which can be surged. And to get this coverage, I don't have a lot of options, so I opted for Oreo Equip and Chacal Brooch for Blind Resist. And the equips on the Algae Kitties are basically for Kurami providing Tape Resist, and Koryu Blade for providing Cloud Resist. So that's basically 4 of the equip slots that I have on this team covered. And I also mentioned before that I wanted to get, so Chacal Equip also provides a skill boost, and in case of overcharge, it also acts as a cleric ability too, just like Odin Dragon. So there are cases where you might go for a long period of time where you don't need to use a specific type of active, such as Odin Dragon. In that case, you might end up overcharging your active, but if you put on a similar type of active that also provides whatever utility you need on top of your base unit, you don't have to worry about overcharge nearly as much. Like in the case of Odin Dragon, like Chacal's Reach is like strictly a superior upgrade, I believe. It might be missing one component, I forgot which one it is, but for tackling critical things such as, it is a straight up upgrade over Odin Dragon's active. So in this case, it's kind of like a match made in heaven, and also Chacal's Brute also provides HP for a more team bulk as well. And Oreo Equip also provides a cleric ability, and in some cases, and in case Tiara overcharges, also avoids attribute and damage absorbed as well. And although she converts away Heart Orbs to Fire Orbs with the active, we can easily just pop this active and then pop like Raw Dragon or like Algae Kitty or anything to like make a board anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And to optimize team damage, since Tiara caps out main and sub attributes easily, I also have the option of swapping these 2 equips around and just planning for Tiara's active use properly. And Julie's equip is to use as a panic button in case a 50% shield is needed for things like boss fights. And Kurumi and Koryu Blade are just there for Cloud and Tape Resist, and any other stat buffs for them are just a bonus. And Raw Dragon's equip slot is actually free for anything ranging from additional HP to something that gives it more damage like Tiara's equip. And it could also be something like a Cross Awakening for countering sticky blind Skyfalls. And there's also a lot of room to play around with these 2 final slots. And so also just because Algae Kitties and Raw Dragon will be used every single turn, their equip actives will almost never see play unless hasted by an enemy. So they're perfect slots for putting in stat boosters or easy hazard resists. So I mentioned like there's different kinds of like assists that you would want to consider. So in the case of a team like this, we can basically see examples of like all of them. For example, Algae Kitty is a unit that starts with a decently high transformation and then eventually converts away to a low cooldown active that you're gonna want to loop. So in case of a unit like Algae Kitty, you're gonna want to make sure that its active, its assisted skill never overcharges at the very start. And after you transform a unit like Algae Kitty, you're going to be using this loop. You're going to be using its active on loop by pretty much every single turn whenever it comes up. So that means that for whatever assist that is going to be going onto units of that archetype, you don't really need to care about whatever active it brings. So because you only have to care about what type of assists, what type of like awakenings that it brings to the team, it opens up your choices like quite a bit. For whatever units you can put up there, and that's also something that you might want to consider when you look at a team. Just because you don't have direct replacements doesn't necessarily mean that there's not going to be any replacements for that unit completely. So if you're going to be using a different resource for basically starting off with like a team template or something like that, right? You're going to want to make sure that you see the team in action to see if that active ever becomes used or not, because that makes substitutions much easier. I see this with a lot of cases where a person would basically see a team that's basically floating around in Japan, or in Japan, and they see a unit from a collab that's never made it over into North America, but the active never gets used, and like the assist that's used in the video is basically like the best in slot. But over here in NA, like, we could basically make a small sacrifice of, like, not having, like, of missing out on, like, a couple of orb enhancements or not having one extra team recovery or something like that. And while there's a lot of replacements, not a lot of people actually see them. So if you're looking over a team that's posted by another person, make sure to check in the comments or the details for like any specific unit substitutions, or just figure them out yourself as close as it can get. Usually, like, damage is something that you can substitute away. Usually, unless it's something significant like getting like a 7C. But if it's something to do with like missing out on a couple of like orb enhances, or if it's like missing one TPA, then it's usually fine to forego in a lot of cases. And yes, this matters a lot for HP thresholds. So the one thing that you probably can't replace easily is going to be Team HP Awakenings. So that's basically Team HP Awakenings and Skill Boosts are the #1 priorities, but usually the other things that come along with it are generally replaceable with something else, with a slightly inferior substitution. So just because you don't have the best in slot assist doesn't mean that you're doomed. You just have to look a little bit carefully for what the substitution is and identify what the equip is being used for in the first place, and just work around that. There's almost always substitutions for a lot of the common assists that are used today. And the other type of active that I would be considering is the other type of assist will be something like the one that's going on Julie. On a low cooldown unit like Tyrannos, or something that's lower, something that's on like a 1 or 2 turn cooldown, you might want to put on something like a shield with like a variable length duration. Something like Paladin Shield is also like a really good option for a lot of teams. To basically have a shield that's almost always ready for you whenever you need it. Or just some other form of utility as well. So in the case of Fire Dragon Tyrannos, you will basically build around the assumption that you will basically never use the base active unless absolutely necessary. So in that case, you're gonna want to prioritize bringing in a utility active that would bring the most benefit to your team, while also providing the bare minimum requirements for whatever else you might need, such as like getting team HP or stuff like that. Like in this case, there's like 2 Team Recovery Awakenings and like an extra finger, just because I'm playing on blue stacks. I wanted that extra finger, I wanted that extra second of move time so that I would be able to solve every single board. And yeah, so in the case of Julie, that's basically the main reason why I chose her. And the other type of assist that you might want to look into is basically if you have, this is more for old style team building, but if both the, actually there's 2 more types. Okay, so the other type is basically one where you want to coordinate the actives of both the main active and the base units. So this is where you would use a certain type of active at the start of the dungeon, but then have the base active be up at a later time. This is more common on units with slightly longer cleric actives, but where you actually have to time the actives for your assist and your main. Like, for example, on some people, they might run something like Blue Albert, where they might inherit something like an attribute Absorb Void that would be used early on, but then would charge up the base active so that the cleric ability would be used somewhere down the line. So there's different ways of approaching these. Leader swap assist is also another one of them. If you want to swap over, if you're running like a 7x6 lead, you're going to want to use some type of leader swap assist on a unit that's most typically on a unit that doesn't require any form of transformation or skill evolution. For example, if you're going to be running something like Die, which is let me find this guy, because not every meta unit basically requires you to transform or use a evolving skill like Dragon Knight Die. This guy basically has a very straightforward active with reduces damage by 75% for 1 turn, blah blah blah. So if you choose to run like a 7x6 leader skill, you can inherit a leader swap assist on top of this guy for an easy 7x6 double rainbow team comp. So yeah, that's also another way that you can do it. Another way that leader swaps are done is through the actives, where a unit would basically swap the leader's skill. the active will basically swap the leader with a sub at a specific unit slot. Typically the rightmost unit slot, sub slot. I believe it's Toto and Crawlo who are the only ones able to do that at the moment outside of One Piece. But yeah, there are ways you can go around leader swap as well. So yeah, leader swapping assist is also very important to know and have access to if needed. And you generally wouldn't run leader swap assists on a unit that would have a transformation ability because leader swap assists generally take like 13 turns to charge. And that's not exactly something that you can afford on most units that have like transforming leaders and stuff like that. So you went over, yeah, Raw Dragon Equip slot is basically free to experiment with. And latents, leader swap latent is nice to have for Swiss Army knife teams, though it can easily be replaced with 6 skill daily resists. I'm assuming Friend LG Kitty will also be running LS latent, leader swap latent, so that's what I'm building around. And a skill boost latent on Odin Dragon is key for meeting skill boost thresholds, but with the amount of haste this team has, it can also be swapped for something like a Surge latent. So that if I needed to bring over something like Poison Resist, I could swap out Odin Dragon's skill boost latent, or I could even just replace a double damage cap latent on Fire Dragon Tyrannos or something like that. Something to that effect. And and Tiara is also a transforming unit, so she will not benefit from a more damage-oriented latent latent, making her a good candidate for a Surge latent, and she does not necessarily need skill delay resists, as her active is on a very low cooldown to begin with, and DDC and SDRs to fill out the remaining slots. And by DDCs, to fill out the remaining slots, I mean like Fire Dragon Tyrannos and Raw Dragon would both have DDCs, and for the remaining slots on units that have like 8 latent slots, I would just put in like skill delay resists. Skill delay resist on Raw Dragon is also kind of nice, just in case you end up running into a floor where your team gets delayed. If your algae kitties are both running leader swap latents, they're gonna get delayed. So you might end up in this position where you won't be able to create a board for yourself unless you have something like Raw Dragon up. Or or there's also the fact that you might just have to rely on Skyfall RNG, but yeah, those cases aren't as common. Like, if it really worries you, you could honestly just opt to just not run DDC on Dark Raw Dragon at all and just stick to running like 6 SDRs or like 8 of them. It's fine. Because most Swiss Army knife teams don't even need DDCs anyways, because you're going to be overkilling most of the game's content, so yeah, there is room to be flexible. Like, you could even run 6 skill day resists on algae kitties as well, because Tiara, Odin Dragon, and algae kitties are yeah, Tiara and Odin Dragon are fine if you get leader swapped into. I can't remember if not Raw Dragon, if Tyrannos is the same. No, 3 times attack. No, no, not for Tyrannos, but let's see. What about Odin Dragon? Odin 2.7 times all stat when team's overall rarity is below 35, reduces damage taken by 30%, and 9 times attack and S3 combo and wouldn't heal that attack at once. So in a case like this, you might opt for taking something like skill daily resist on algae kitties instead. And maybe putting on a leader swap latent on Fire Dragon Tyrannos, so that Fire Dragon Tyrannos is the only unit that it can't be leader swapped into. Since most of the other units are fine if you get swapped into, so there are ways you can work around this as well. And yes, if you put on leader swap latent on a sub, that also means that your leader cannot be swapped into it as well. So if you have a team that's fine if you get leader swapped otherwise, then you might want to just opt for something like skill daily resist instead. So there's room to work around there. So this is basically the thought process behind making my Swiss Army knife team, and this is basically what I came up with one flex slot. I'm slowly working my way towards building this team. The thing that I'm gonna be needing to do now is clearing the Friday dungeon so that I can get another gem so I can evolve the rest of my units as assists. And the last piece of the puzzle is basically making sure that I can clear Raw Dragon Descended. And yeah, so just to recap, this is basically something, this is my thought process on tackling a shorter dungeon, which is Odin Dragon. So this team is for Odin Dragon Descended using my limited box. One thing to note is that this team is not consistent with, this means that it will take multiple attempts to get a single clear, or you'll need to stone to continue for more consistent clears, although I normally advise against stoning for continues. There are very rare cases where an exception can be made. Stones are a valuable resource, but in the end they're still a resource, so it's important that you calculate the values of the resource before you spend them. Odin Dragon's evolution requires 4 gems, and is that worth 4 stones? If you can get it in 4 stones, then I'd say yes. It's cheaper than a roll in the rem, and this unit is arguably more powerful and valuable than most of the stuff in it. So in this particular case, I would recommend it if you can put yourself in a position where you can get an Odin Dragon for the cost of just 4 stones. That being said, I will lay down some ground rules for stoning for continues, because I do not want people to take that as permission to basically just stone for whatever dungeon is possible, because stoning for dungeon should be reserved for cases where clearing the dungeon will give you access to a unit that's extremely powerful and is core to your team. Otherwise, if you're gonna be farming, if you're gonna be doing that, if you're gonna be running dungeons like arenas, where it's basically just so that you can stockpile materials and stuff like that, it's not worth burning stones for that. Or just work on your team, or work on getting your materials in other forms. It's just that in this case, because Odin Dragon and Raw Dragon and those units are so powerful and are basically critical for completing these teams, where I would make an exception that if you can clear the dungeon with 1 stone, 1 continue, then it may be worth it. But that being said, you would not stone for continue to basically get skill ups. You would only do it to get the evolution material first, and then the rest of the... And then you would only be working on that unit through skilling up with like Ps and stuff like that. So the ground rules that I set for myself is the unit must be valuable enough to warrant a stone, and this is only after you've exhausted all other non-continue ways of obtaining the unit. For example, co-op is an option for some valuable farmable units. And Odin Dragon Descended to solo dungeon is entirely dependent on the player box and skill. So in this case, because we're working with such a limited box, I decided that yeah, if I can get it within 4 stones, then it's probably going to be a worthy investment. And another thing is if you're struggling to create a team, and you have a fairly sizable box, then please look into how other people have built their teams around this dungeon as well, because it's going to be very important. And you might be able to, and like I said about making eclipse substitutions, you might be able to do something similar, even with if it's like something as major as swapping out like base units. But there's nothing stopping you from making your own team for this dungeon anyways. And that's basically something that I want to teach as well. So the completion rate of the dungeon, if the completion rate of the dungeon is lower than 1 stone's worth of stamina per clear, then like for example, if you have 500 stamina and you can clear the dungeon like 1 every 3 runs, then just run it 3 times. Just run it like 5 times and get a clear in. Don't stone for it. Because stoning for stamina in that case is more worth it. Maybe less efficient for time, but if you care about the value of your stones and you're not just gonna like whale away everything, then yeah, it's more important that you basically squeeze out the maximum amount of value. And also because don't forget that we also have free 2 ad refreshes every single day, so that's also something that you might want to consider as well. Like if Odin Dragon is in the rotation and you have like 1,500 stamina to basically burn through it, then I mean like that's usually enough, right? If you're only trying to get enough clears just for your evolutions, yeah. So and only stone for continue if you can guarantee a clear with a stone. Do not stone more than once, or if there's a risk that you cannot clear after stoning once. So the only times that I've stoned in this dungeon is basically on the final floor when I'm fighting Raw Dragon. After he gets enraged and puts up a 95% shield. This team isn't really consistent with healing up back to full HP, which is the main reason why I ended up stunning to continue, but after that stone, but I knew that if I were to stone, I would have actives that would let me basically one-shot the boss guaranteed every single time, because I'd have access to roulettes and like time extents. So in that case, because I knew I had all the tools on hand to basically guarantee that I'd be able to kill the boss, that's the only reason why I stoned to continue. If there was a risk in me not being able to clear it, like for example, if my actives weren't up, or if I yeah, mainly if my actives weren't up and I wasn't able to guarantee myself a perfectly rainbow board, or like 4 green orbs to get the Odin's leader skill activation off, then I would not stone. I would just re-enter the dungeon. It's not worth it. It's too much of a risk. And once you start stoning for if like, the worst part is falling into sunk cost fallacy, where you stone to continue, you don't get it clear, and then you just die immediately again the next turn. You might be tempted to stone again, but that just means that you shouldn't have stoned in the first place, and I think it's just better that you just cut your losses and just leave the dungeon. Just take that as like a lesson, a 1 stone lesson. Just cut your losses and just be done with it. And with that out of the way, I'll go into how I build my team for the specific dungeon. So step number 1 is understanding the dungeon. So if you want to understand the dungeon, you're going to have to watch YouTube videos, read floor-by-floor guides, or look up dungeon info, do whatever it takes to understand the dungeon, the hazards that it presents. I made a TLDR set of notes on the left as I built the team for with floor-by-floor spawns with the preamps and parentheses. And one thing about the dungeon, one thing about this game is the monsters generally have the same moveset across different dungeons. So, like, Durgas will always have a damage absorb shield, Oichi will always hit you with a time extend debuff and a combo shield, Iron Hod always has attribute absorbs, and etc. Like, this means that the more dungeons that you run, and the more monsters that you encounter, the easier it is for you to make mental notes to deal with on how to deal with various spawns if you're running dungeons blindly. So in this case, I basically went over to a YouTube video, and I started by watching and taking notes on basically what each of the monsters did at the start. So I'm basically entering this dungeon with the expectation that I'll be able to one-shot every single floor, which is why I didn't go too crazy with listing its entire movesets. But for this dungeon, it was fine because Tira is basically more than enough damage to kill everything on the board. So I listed that, okay, the first floor is Moye with a DPS check. Floor 2 is Lemon Dragon that always throws up a green absorb, which is fine because Tiara can kill with her sub-attributes. Oichi does a 7C combo check and a time extend debuff. Durga always puts up a damage absorb shield, and Ironheart always does a blue-green attribute absorb. Odin, and then it's Odin Dragon. So in a short dungeon like this, the spawns are guaranteed. It's very easy to build around because you know exactly what's going to happen. Building around arenas is a little bit different because the floors have variable spawns, where your team might be better suited for dealing with certain spawns or just straight up instant die to certain other spawn types as well. So in the case of a short dungeon like Odin Dragon Descended, it really helps that these units are basically fixed in terms of what they do. Because we're also using this as an example for how you can team build, right? So yeah, I made a TLDR and identify the core units. So I know that this dungeon requires damage, but only 1 unit needs to hit the damage cap for all stages. And for that reason, I basically opted to use Tiara, because she was the unit in my box that hit the literal hardest. And Tiara also has a great option for this team because of her super strong damage. The fact that her active helps her in floor 4 and 5, and her light sub-attribute lets her punch through Lemon Dragon's green absorb, and her damage is tied to attributes, which is tied to Gaia Dragon's leader skill. Which means that whenever I'm going to be activating my leader skill, Tiara is also going to be hitting super hard, so that's basically the reason why I opted for Tiara. Other options for this kind of slot would be something like a Reach as well. So there is a Reach with killer latents. Like, there are ways around it. And I also understand that we're running a rainbow team, and these teams don't need to have some and these teams need to have some sort of way to fix boards in case of bad RNG. Like if I don't have like 4 or 5 attributes on the board. So having board changes is a good idea, and I hold the slot as I pick the rest of my team. So I decide to, and this is basically like going back to the way that I built my other team as well. So once you identify a core unit or core subs, the next thing is to basically fill out the rest of the team slots with what's needed for team's functionality. So we need board changers, a time extender, We need board changes for leader skill activations. We need time extender for Oichi. And enough skill boosts to basically transform Tiara on turn 1 or as early as possible. So Uruka has 4 skill boosts and covers blue and dark and pairs nicely with Tiara for 4 and 5 so that we can get like 3 combined turns of attribute absorb void. Attribute absorb and damage absorb void because we need 3 turns of that consecutively. And so she was basically an instant add because she covers those elements. And I did not bother cycling her skillless Super Awakening because there was no need. Kagimen is on a 5-turn cooldown and provides spinners and a time extend, which means it's up for Oichi's floor, and again for Odin Dragon's kill floor, so that was another add. The only thing that we're missing is red attribute coverage and 4 skill boosts, so and because I could basically use any unit with 4 skill boosts and fire attribute coverage, I basically opted to use Elmina because she's cute. An Elmina Fitness Bottom could also take Bind Resist Super Awakening, which is also a very nice touch. So the reason why the Bind Resist Super Awakening is a nice touch is because Odin Dragon, I believe it's Odin Dragon that throws up a bind twice, I think? I can't really remember. It might not have been Odin Dragon, it might have been someone else actually. But yeah, there are 2 instances where bind resists happen, or bind resists are required. The first of them is when fighting Odin Dragon, though you're going to be popping Odin on the floor to unbind your Gaia Dragon anyways. And the other one is a middle floor somewhere, but I forgot exactly where. And there's also no assist allowed in this dungeon, and the only lane that works it is Poison Surge. And because I already planned for Tiara to be in my main team to have either Poison or Jammer Surge, I decided to put on Poison Surge over here as well, which I got through the Adrem, which is always worth watching 4 times a day. And so I slapped it on her, and I got the Poison, yeah. But monthly quests sometimes feature different latents as well. And in the end, I ended up using 3 stones for my 4 gems. And yeah, so in the notes section under here, I also made some more detailed notes, like don't forget the team does not have auto follow-up attacks since no match swap, and missing stop slot should be red or green unit with like 6 skill boost total, but turns out that wasn't really needed because we swapped it out with Kakiman instead. And this team is not meant to be consistent due to extremely limited box, but matching 4 attributes should be okay. Even if you need to stone 4 stones for getting Odin Dragon is cheaper and arguably more valuable than a single roll in the REM. And that's basically another like mental note. So you shouldn't stone if you're gonna be, if your kill and completion is not guaranteed. So this is basically the rough floor by floor that I planned out. So on floor 1, I would transform Tiara and basically just solve. Moye is very a straightforward floor. So long as you activate your leader skill, it's basically free. Floor 2 is basically solve, where Tiara's sub-attribute should pierce through where Tiara sub-attribute basically pierces through Lemon Dragon's green absorb. And then Kagiman to overwrite the time extend debuff, and then basically solve, make sure to hit 8C using the spinners to your advantage. And off floor 4, I would use floor 4 and 5 is Uruka and Tiara, depending on if I need a fresh board or not. And just working around that. And even though this team doesn't have a follow-up attack, because we have Jammer Surge, the way that floor 4 works in this specific case is we don't have follow-up attacks, but it's fine because what happens when you hit Durga to her resolve is she basically gives you Sticky Blind Skyfalls, and she also gives you Mortal Poison Skyfalls. But because we decide to take Poison Surge, that basically means that we only have to deal with the Poison Sticky Blind Skyfalls, which are easily workable if you just know what you're doing. So the tip that I would give for Sticky Blind Skyfalls is basically just you can check what orbs are being blinded by just pushing on them, just touching them. So make notes of what orbs are what blinded orbs are which attributes. Just generally, like it's pretty easy up to like having like 5 different sticky blind orbs and stuff like that. It gets a little bit more confusing when there's more than that, but when you have like that many, just generally remember what attributes are where. And then my tip is to basically prioritize matching those sticky blind orbs away first and then solve the rest of the board afterwards. So just by prioritizing like 4 different single like horizontal combos early, you can basically make sure that you have room to solve the rest of the board with non-sticky Skyfalls, non-sticky blind orbs. So that's basically my tip. Just solve away the sticky blinds first, or if you can even get your leader skill off without even needing to rely on any of the sticky blinds, you can just solve around them too. Like there's no reason to force yourself to do it, especially if the sticky blind Skyfall only lasts for 1 turn. Where in that case, where if you just solve around it, then the next turn they're gonna be revealed. So yeah, you don't have to force yourself to do something like that. So yeah, so I opted to just tank the sticky blind Skyfall because trying to fit in a follow-up attack was gonna be too much of a hassle, and because I didn't have a leader swap that I could use at the time. So we compromised and we decided to go with it. So working with a limited box, you're gonna end up making a lot of compromises, but it's fine, pretty much. So like you can't expect to have like a 100% consistent team for a lot of the game's content when you've only been playing for like a couple of weeks. That's pretty much the same in like any like MMO or something that RPG you would be playing, right? Where you can't realistically expect to take on like endgame dungeons with a completely fresh account that's not even at like what I would call like a soft cap. So yeah, just play around with it. Don't take it too hard if your team just dies for some reason. Just learn from the death and just learn to team build. Because when you have a super limited box like this, unless you're willing to whale super hard, you will not be able to follow the majority of team templates that you find online. So you're gonna have to do a lot of the team building yourself. And this is basically the same case with like every player once they first start out. And one reason why I would recommend that you basically just... And one reason why I would recommend you learn to build your own teams is because when you're learning to build teams like this, you expose yourself to a lot of different cards that you would not normally know existed. So in order to broaden your horizons, whenever you get a new card, I would highly, highly recommend checking its evolutions to see if there's any form that you might be able to use. Because a lot of the farmable units, a lot of the older farmable units actually have pretty valuable evolutions that are still used in a couple teams nowadays. Like, one of them, I would say, is Dryad, I think? So Dryad basically has like a bunch of different forms. But then there's like World Tree Spirit Alaron. This unit is basically like recovers 10 times recovery and HP, fully recovers bind status including Awoken, and 1.5 times recovery for 7 turns. So the 1.5 times recovery is able to be self-looped on 7 turns if needed. And not only that, she has bind resist, she has 6 skill boosts, and she also has the option of taking and she also has 2 team HP boosts as well. So for a farmable unit like this, if you're in need of a quick fix like a healer or some sort, or like a cleric type ability, there's a farmable unit like this that would normally go under the radar for a lot of players because they don't know that such a unit exists, because you don't roll these type of units in the RAM. There's other pretty decent forms as well. Like Super Dryad is also the evolution of that. Fully recovers bind status and recovers HP for 2 turns. In this case, you might be able to just in this case, if you wanted to get rid of roulettes, you could slap on a roulette latent on this unit, and then you can clear a whole bunch of roulettes away for every row of hearts that you make and stuff like that. And not only that, because this unit also has a L shield. Oops, I wasn't showing this. Yeah, because the other unit I was showing you was basically this World Tree Spirit Alrune 1101, a farmable cleric that pretty much anyone can get access to like fairly easily. And the evolution of that is basically the Super Dryad, which serves a completely different purpose, but is also another cleric unit that has a pretty flexible kit as well. Like for example, because she has the L shield, she can take the skill boost latent, so that brings it from 1 plus 3 from the skill boost latent to 4 skill boosts, And she can also take another 2 skill boosts through her Super Awakening. So it's another 6 skill boost cleric. Like, there's a lot of units that basically just fly under the radar because of that. So I would highly, highly recommend, whenever you find a new box in your unit, long press it, check its evolution tree, and just go through every single one of them to identify which ones you can make use of and which ones you can't. And this also applies to like all of your shiny new rem rolls and stuff like that too. Check out all the evolutions. You don't check out all the evolutions. Pay attention to which ones have really nice awakenings, because the ones that have really nice awakenings are usually the ones that have also been buffed into relevancy as well. Like typically if you find like an active with like a really bad set of awakenings, then first of all, then you probably wouldn't even be fitting that into your team anyways, but it probably also has like a pretty dated active too. So in that case, you might be able to just skip over it, but pay attention to all the units that you get. Check out all the evolutions, including farmables, and you might be surprised by what you might be able to build. Like for example, in this case, I even with like Noctaria, I needed red coverage for my team, and Fire Dragon Tyrannos is actually the best candidate I could find out of all the options that I could get. It was even better than a unit like Aura, which is the background music unit for this team, because while Aura is nice, her cooldown being like 23 turns long basically made her really difficult to use, and also made it so that I wouldn't be able to bring a shield if I wanted to. And if I wanted to bring a unit like Noctaria or Raffine, Noctaria is also on a very long skill cooldown, so I wouldn't be able to transform her early. And while I would be able to transform Raffine early, it's not really suitable for shorter dungeons because of how long it takes for her to do the second state transformation. Though it would be a nice candidate for some of the longer dungeons like arenas, but yeah. Pay attention to farmables, because you never know if they're gonna be like really strong or not. Like in this case, my team, 3 of my 6 units are quote-unquote farmables. And I know that once I actually finish this team, it would be able to handle, like, a lot of the game. Like, a lot. And that's something that I really want to prove to everyone as well. So, hopefully I'll be able to gain access to Raw Dragon Descended sometime in, like, the coming week or so, where I'll be able to finish making this team. But, yeah, when next week happens, yeah, hopefully I'll be able to get a Raw Dragon spawn by next week, so that I'll be able to do this, and then we can basically and then I'll basically try to clear as many of the in-game dungeons as I possibly can and see where I basically get stuck and for what reason. So there's that. And I wanted to go over something similar, like how I built my team for Odin Dragon. I wanted to do something similar and make my team for Raw Dragon on stream as kind of like a case study as well. So we have Odin Dragon team already, so let's try to look for a video of, oops. So this is a video by Sergeant 502, Raw Dragon Descended. So let's take a look at this. We don't really need to use, we can't even use any of we don't have access to any of the subs that are being shown in the video. So we're just going to be using this for dungeon info. And let's start with the very beginning. So I'm going to be opening up pad DB. And let me start by creating a new team. So from the very get-go, this team, we only have 4 different subslots that we can use. So this is Reincarnated Raw. Super Reincarnated Raw, I believe. Where are you? Should be somewhere down here. Yep. And the other slot is Zeus Dragon. Bam, 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 bam. Okay. So this is the baseline we have. Okay, so I'm gonna be going into my notes section plus okay, so raw dragon and PE. Raw dragon descended, Cadenza and PE. So floor 1 is gonna be Sphinx 2 units bound. I don't know if it's specifically 2 units or if it's based on like a certain typing. It doesn't seem to be typing because only one of these at 10s got bound, so I'm assuming it's 2 units bound. So we'll start off with that. Orb time halved. And attack is halved as well. Though attack being halved is really a non-issue if you're bringing a unit like Tiara, just because she's gonna be punching way over her, way over like what's required anyways. So, but we'll keep track of whatever we need while we make this team. And so first dragon, okay. Yeah, we don't have Odin, so we're just gonna ignore that and we're gonna keep going. All we need is basically what the spawns are gonna be doing to us. We're just scouting out dungeon info at this point, so I will be speeding up this playback. Lemon Dragon, turn 2. Floor 2. Okay. F2, Lemon Dragon, and this is LG Absorb, LG Lock Skyfall. So light and green being locked is a bit of a problem for us because that means Tiara won't be able to hit it at all. Unless we somehow manage to get some attribute absorption going. Which we might be able to do with the form of via Aurea. So I'm keeping that in mind. So the next floor, I believe this is Spica? I could be getting the wrong one, but going with Spica for now. 50% super resolved. Making a note of that, and so she puts up shield and a 13 combo. Status shield plus 13C. Yeah, we can just skip ahead. Wait, a 13C plus 7x6 3 turns. And then at 50%, she puts up a VDP shield. Uh-huh. Like, we're getting orb time halved a lot. And that's slightly worrying. But we might be able to just finesse our way through it. Might be able to. And then the next floor, we have a Slime Knight. And this guy is 90% shield. So while we're basically figuring out the dungeon data through this form, right? This is a little bit of manual data collection. I am going to hop over into something like Sky Azura later so that I can get the exact HP numbers for these guys, because something like a 90% shield, gut feeling says that 90% like if I'm damage capping and hitting for 4 billion, I might be able to still kill this guy, but if I only have one damaging unit, it might not be enough for a one shot. So to double check if I have enough damage to be able to consistently one shot like all these guys, I will be referencing another site to basically check if it's gonna be enough or not. I have a feeling that I won't be able to just because I only have one unit that's dealing damage in the form of Tiara, but we'll see. And then turn 2, this guy basically spawns spinners and dartboard. If you have enough time extends, because we have spinners, this means that this is also pretty easily solvable for a free kill, but we'll see. Okay, the next floor is Bastet. Status Shield, Board Change, Skyfall. Board Change into Green Light and Heart. And Green Skyfall. I'm assuming this floor is going to be one-shottable, so we're just going to keep going. And then this is F6 is the Raw Dragons. So D-Raw. So this guy is basically TED buff, skill delay, sticky blind, skyfall, 7-turn countdown. Oh, draw. To be honest, for the purposes of our team building, we only have to care about Dark Raw Dragon because we're not going to be making Light Raw Dragon, but we'll make both just because we don't know what's going to be used when. And because both of them are popular subs for Algae Kitty, there's no reason for us to skip out on the other. But in the case where we don't have enough stamina to like finish farming Light Raw Dragon, it's not too much of a problem, but yeah, just something to keep in mind. I might actually start saving up a couple of stones so that I might have to stone for stamina in the worst case, but we'll see. Yeah, so we're not following the strategy because we're just going to be punching this guy really, really hard, like, as many turns as we need. We don't have the... Yeah, the gravity does help, but we can't really use anything else from this video, so we're just keep going. So in the case of Light Raw Dragon, this guy also has a 50% shield. 50% Super Resolve. 4-turn time effect. 4 status shield plus the debuff plus Skyfall debuff plus 90 shield. Uh, 4-turn countdown to start. So we can use the first couple turns to basically just chip away at the debuffs that we've been given. And the following turn, by using Zeus Dragon, we can basically just chunk him down to an HP range that's easy to take him to 50% with one hit. Okay, so it's full bind. For at 50% super resolve, he basically does full bind, skill challenge, 6 match, 6 attributes. And if you fail, he will seal the top row, which is actually kind of problematic for Rainbow Team, so we're going to keep that in mind. And then I believe after this point, it's just a DPS race. Yeah. It's also super easy to kill this guy after this point because during the 4-turn cooldown to start, we basically stalled out the 90% shield as well, so this guy becomes extremely squishy after you pass a skill challenge. So that's basically the thing that we're gonna have to keep in mind. So now that we have all the tools, now that we have the dungeon data on hand, it's time to actually start piecing things together. So I'm gonna be going through the exact same steps that I've gone through with the previous team, just like Odin Dragon. So let me swap over to this. So this team is for Odin Dragon Descended using my limited box. So one thing to note is I might want to opt for a different damage dealer. But I don't need to. Because the only problem with running Tiara is the fact that she gets kind of held up by Lemon Dragon. If we have a way of dealing with Lemon Dragon, then Tiara is still a really solid pick and will be able to provide a lot of damage that we need. So I'm going to be tentatively putting Tiara over here. Not really caring about the positioning of the sub-attributes or anything like that right now. I'm just trying to put everything together so that I have a general idea of how many skill boosts I can bring on this team. So one option that I have of dealing with the attribute absorb will be something like bringing Aurea. Or there's also the option of bringing Uruka as well. Uruka being a particularly good option for this too. Just because she brings in 4 skill boosts. Very, very nice. And we also have to remember that Super Reincarnated Ra also brings some additional stats to the table, including the fact that he extends orb move time for 7 turns on a 7-turn cooldown. So we're able to use this. So we can actually use this early. The reason being, okay, so we're faced with a bunch of different time extend debuffs, right? So I believe we get hit with them like 3 times. The first time we get hit with is Sphinx. The second time is when we hit Spica to 50% Super Resolve. And the third time is basically Dark Raw Dragon or Light Raw Dragon. In the case of Light Raw Dragon, because it happens so far into the dungeon, right? If you use the time extend buff on Spica's 50% Resolve. Actually, wait. Does Zeus Dragon? Zeus Dragon actually overwrites it too. So the only cases where we need to use these time extends is either on Spica floor or on Sphinx. Sphinx will try to just finesse. If we die on turn 1, nothing much of value is lost other than a bit of stam, so that's fine. But on Spica, if we can't get the on Spica, we're a little bit further into dungeon, so we want to try to increase our consistency as much as possible from here on. So I might try to overwrite and it's also because on Spica we're also going to be dealing with the 7x6 board. So having as much time extend as possible is going to be really nice. So tentatively I'm going to be putting down Raw Dragon for floor 3 on turn 2. Not Raw Dragon, Raw. And we're going to want to transform our Tiara turn 1 as well. So we're missing 10 skill boosts, which is quite a bit. But there's also no reason why we are forced to transform Tiara super early either. If need be, we can actually transform Tiara on turn 2, on floor 2. Yeah, okay. So let's take a look at some of the other things that we're going to be dealing with. So there's Static Shield. Okay, I'm also going to be booting up my second... Is booting up my second instance of BlueStacks going to crash my computer? I don't know. I'm going to hold off on that for now. So what else do we need? So we have the light and green absorb, which can be handled by Uruka. Status Shield for 13 combos is also on a 7x6 board, so that's not too much of a problem. Our leader skills also increase our combo by 3 when we match 5 attributes because of Raw. We're gonna want to try to... Okay, so we might end up doing the same thing that we did before. We can actually bring in Coggyman. And if we bring over Coggyman, another benefit to this is the fact that... whatchamacallit? Another benefit to bringing Kaguyan is also the fact that this guy brings in like 4 skill boosts. And a blind res, but that's fine. 2 extra seconds of move time, and a Cross Awakening is also really nice. Cross Awakening is nice because if we're going to be fighting Dark Raw Dragon, this guy also spams you with Sticky Blind Skyfall, so if you can afford to fit in like a light cross, then it makes the fight a lot easier. Let's see. And also, because we have 2 different forms of time extends, we can actually use them both on Sphinx and Spica, and again later if we do need to for a light Raw Dragon fight. So there's that. Other than that, I think it's pretty solid. We have our damage. We have ways of dealing with the Lemon Dragon through Uruka. Spica is pretty easy because once if you can just punch through the Spica actually requires you to be able to punch through her VDP for 1 turn, which can be remedied by just using a VDP latent on either Uruka or Tiara. So tentatively, I'm just gonna put VDP on Tiara because she is much more likely to deal 4 billion damage. Poison Surge and Jammer Surge are something that you're going to end up with a lot of if you end up grinding out endgame dungeons anyway, so it's fine. So let's go with that. Let's see. So Slime Knight is the one with the 90% shield, which we're going to be killing in 2 turns because of the spinners and Darkboard. Bastet is a status shield board changer with a green light and heart and green skyfall. Do we have any L unlocks? L unlocking might actually be pretty useful. Question mark, but I don't think it's necessary. The only problem with having locked green skyfalls is the fact that so Uruka's active skill actually doesn't really work in that case because she doesn't unlock the board beforehand. So we're gonna want to try to bring in some form of an L unlock if possible. Tiara is just straight damage, so she's not gonna bring any of that. So the last sub-slot is going to be something that with as many skill boosts as possible while also bringing some form of L unlock. And also bringing attribute coverage, so it's going to be another red unit. We could bring over Floof again. We could. Because Ilmina can take an L unlock. So if we're to do this, we have 18 turns, so we would have to just stall out 2 turns, which is completely fine. If we kill Sphinx in 2 turns, that means Tiara's going to be up for the following turn. Yeah, this is totally workable. Okay, and then, so we have L unlock for Bastet floor, and then on floor 6 is going to be the Raw Dragons, where Dark Raw Dragon is a TE debuff and the 7 turns to just kill. 7 turns to kill is going to be super easy just because Tiara is going to be like hitting 4 billion damage per turn. And there's also the fact that we also have Zeus for some more damage. Okay, actually, let's go back to this video again and see how much damage is being dealt with the Zeus Gravity. So the Zeus Gravity does 10 billion damage, and I believe that's a 30% gravity? It's a 35% gravity. So it's fair to assume that this guy's HP is 3 times this, roughly. So this guy has 30 billion HP. And he just chunked away 10 billion of it, so he has 4 billion HP left. 20 billion HP. 20 billion HP left. Which means that we only have to deal... which means that Tiara will easily pass a damage check, pretty much. Especially because this guy's attributes are dark and light. So Tiara's never going to be faced with like an attribute disadvantage. Like this would be a different story if the Raw Dragon had like a fire main attribute, for example. But in this case, so long as you activate your leader skill every single turn, it's a non-issue. Activating your leader skill every single turn could be a little bit rough, just because we don't have any other dedicated board fixers other than Kaguyan, which is only really for 1 turn. So if possible, I want to replace Floof with someone else. Okay, so I don't want to check my... I don't want to open up BlueStacks again just in case I end up crashing. So I'm going to open up my thing and check out what new roles I got in the progression tab. So over here, this is basically the new set of units that we got. So red coverage that comes to mind is Matcha, Yamato, and there's also Paimon. So we can start off with, I think Paimon is the least likely candidate for this team, so let's just start off with her. Let's find reasons why she wouldn't fit. So in the case of Paimon, Mega Woken Paimon, the evolution form that we would use for red coverage is going to be this one, Mega Woken Scarlet King of Hell Paimon. Fully recover Awoken Skillbind status, removes orbs locked, and changes water orbs to heal orbs. This actually breaks our leader skill activation, and she can only bring 4 skill boosts. Granted, she could bring more with the L shield, she could. But because we can't really bring any assists on top of her, she brings damage and skill boost, but because she only brings skill boost, we're gonna do a pass on her. Because, yeah, we're looking for a little bit more consistency, and that requires having a better board changer or something, or either board changer or somewhere to stall. Actually, Paimon isn't completely out of the race. But the tricky part is the fact that she also requires like one of the huge gems. It's not impossible, because Saturday Dungeon is tomorrow. So we can easily exchange up for it, but just saying that. Just putting that out there. So Paimon is a candidate with the potential to get 7 skill boosts. With the double skill boosts. And an L shield. And she also has okay personal damage with 8/7Cs, so that's also gonna help chip away at the 30 billion HP. The other unit is Yamato. So super reincarnated Yamato Takeru. So the problem with this unit right now is the fact that I have no way to devolve him, so he's kind of stuck in this form. And that's not really that much of an issue because this guy is also another potential candidate for 5 skill boosts. This guy can be 4 skill boosts. This is an easy way out just by taking the skill boost Super Awakening. But the other way I can get around that is basically by taking the L shield instead and slapping on a skill boost plus latent on this guy. So this guy can go up to 5 skill boosts. This guy also has a very high personal damage with multiple crosses and 10C and a 7C. So this is 2.5, 2.5, that's 6.25, that's 31 times, that's 60 times personal damage multiplier, roughly. It's not, okay, never mind. It's not super high, but it's decent. It's more than enough for putting a dent in Raw Dragon's HP. And it's also more damage than what Paimon can put out. So there's that. Removes orbs lock, changes wood orbs to fire orbs, and so this guy also brings leader skill activation again. But this guy also removes orbs locks, so if need be, we can also pop Uraka as well with that, so that's fine. The next interesting leader skill is Matcha. The reason why Mega Woken Matcha is such an interesting pick is she switches places with leader monster and uses again to switch back, reduces damage by 75% for 1 turn. And 6 times attack for God type for 1 turn. So because she reduces damage by 75% 1 turn, we can also treat this as kind of like a pseudo skill boost. So she has 4 with the, if I take the skill boost awakening, she basically has 4 plus 1 skill boosts in her kit. She has decent personal damage multiplier. She also has an L built into her kit. And not only that, her leader skill is easier to use. So her reduces damage taken by 65% and adds 2 combos and 3 plus attacks attack at once and 21 times attack and inflicts 1 damage with 5 plus linked orbs. So the leader skill requirements gets reduced drastically compared to someone like Super Reincarnated Raw, where it reduces damage taken by 35% and 7 times attack and adds 3 combos when 5 attributes attack at once. And reduces damage taken by 50% and inflicts 1 damage with 6 plus combos. So your survivability basically hinges on you having 5 attributes on the board at once, which is kind of a tough ask. Which is why a lot of teams would actually opt to switch over for Matcha instead. And you're much more likely to have 3 attributes on the board than you are to have 5. And because the leader skill activation is so easy, it severely lessens the dependency on having low cooldown board changers. So that's the main reason why I think Matcha is probably the best candidate for this dungeon. And the best part about this is Matcha also doesn't have very expensive evolution materials other than having a diamond dragon fruit. And unlike Paimon, she doesn't need anything like having a skill boost latent, which is also fairly expensive for new players, or getting something like a huge fire gem. So yeah, this is probably the option that we're going to be going with. So let's go with Matcha. And her so one thing to note is the fact that her active skill cooldown is at 21 turns at max skill. So we're going to be replacing this with Matcha. So let's do that first quickly since we know exactly what we're doing with this team. And we'll give Matcha her skill boost. So this team is at 18 turns. But okay. Let's stop and think about this a little bit then. So in the end, I feel like we're gonna be stuck stalling for 2 turns regardless. Unless there was something in the video that I missed. For example, if we start off at the top. So Super Reincarnated Rod does not start off with any Super Awakenings or anything like that because it's level 99. Same with Raw Dragon. Zeus Dragon. So this means that this is basically it. Safer to just go with level 99. So with that, let's see. What else could we work with? So Uruka provides both blue... So Uruka only needs to cover blue. And while she is useful for a kill board, she's not absolutely mandatory because Tiara's damage only requires having 4 attributes at once. So there is room to substitute Uruka away for someone else that has more skill boosts. And I'm trying to remember if I have any other blue units that can provide blue. There is Tachibana, and there is also Yamato as well, both being very good substitutions that could work instead. Yamato wouldn't necessarily be used for anything other than his crosses and high personal damage, but Tachibana creates a quad board. Super Reincarnated Tachibana Ginchio. Okay, so removes orbs log, changes orbs to fire, water, wood, light, and heal orbs, reduces damage to 75% for 1 turn, all orbs enhanced. So because this is also another active with reduces damage by 75% for 1 turn, we can treat this as like a semi skill boost. So we can treat it as like a quote-unquote pseudo 5 turns skill boost unit. So we might opt for this instead. The only annoying part about this is the fact that I'm going to need a Senri gem, but that's not that much of a problem. And a Rainbow Medal is also a little bit expensive, but since we're going to be doing AP dungeons anyways, it's not that bad. So let's swap out Uruka for Tachibana instead. And also she has incredibly high personal damage and triple crosses as well. Triple crosses means that because each cross also clears away 3 turns of Sticky Blindfall, if we were to run into Dark Raw Dragon, we can actually make a cross of blue or light at the very start, and basically not have to deal with Sticky Blindfalls again. And also Fire, Water, Wood, and Light is also 4 attributes, which is perfect for Tiara because she only needs 4 attributes, and of the 4 attributes, it includes Wood and Light, which are 2 main attributes. So if we were to pop Tachibana, she'll be able to hit at full strength. And because this is also on a 9-turn cooldown, we know that we can actually use Tachibana twice in a dungeon, at the very start for stalling, and another time later on when we need a kill board for either Dark or Loud Right Dragon. So we're going to be substituting Uruka for Tachibana, and that's basically... And by basically making these like substitutions, finding better and better units, this is basically how you can evolve your team into being better and better, incrementally. And this is also another reason why it's so important that you roll in a diverse amount of special rems so that you have access to more units. And also, if you don't know all the evolutions of your units, then it's basically like not understanding what a tool in your toolbox does. So I highly recommend, basically, if you have time, just go through your box, go through all your new units, and just check over what they do and try to make mental notes of what kind of archetypes like these units fall into. It'll make team building a lot easier if you know generally what kind of a unit does what, so that you can just have a smaller pool of units to work with instead of having to sift through your entire box over and over again, because that's just gonna burn through your time a lot. And later on, as your box gets a little bit bigger, you can also opt to search for specific skills and leader skills through PadDB's skill search. There's also ilmina.com as well, which is also another super valuable resource that you might want to check out and filter units through as well. Granted, with a small box, it's more efficient that you just learn exactly what all the box units in your box does. But for endgame players with a much more developed box, when you're dealing with like box sizes of like in the several thousands, in those cases, you might want to opt for using specific skills to narrow down your options down to by basically, yeah, narrowing down your options from the entire like Pokédex equivalent, I guess is what I would say. So with a team like this, we actually end up with a 16 skill boost instead. So Uraka had more skill boost than no, it's because of this. So we are back at 18 skill boosts. So the game plan for this kind of team would kind of be, on the first turn, we would try to on the first turn, I'm assuming that we would actually be able to stall out one turn regularly without the use of a shield. So we would try to match hard, and there is a chance that we might actually end up killing the unit instead. But in the off chance that we don't, then there's gonna be, then Matcha basically has skill charges. So for every turn that we match 5 attributes, Matcha basically charges up her skill by 3 turns. Which means that if we have 18 skill boost on turn 1, by just matching 1 turn of 5 attributes, Matcha will actually be skill boosted up into having her active skill up at 21 turns. So this means that whether we kill, so if we get a full activation on turn 1, then we can basically pop Matcha on turn 2. But otherwise, if we kill on the first turn and we don't have the full attribute coverage, when we're going to Lemon Dragon, we can simply pop Tachibana, heal and stall up, basically, and then the following turn we can also pop Matcha again. So there's basically ways around this. And alternatively, there's also this. Okay, so let's say on the first turn we got Orb Trolled. We don't have enough attributes, but we have enough HP to tank it, basically by just using Raw's bulk. So we match that turn, and on the second turn, it's going to be a little bit difficult for us to heal up all the way, so we decide to pop Tachibana. And Tachibana's board doesn't guarantee a full rainbow board either, so Matcha's not going to be hasted again. But after we solve Tachibana's board, we're basically at 20 skill boost equivalents, which basically means that we can actually pop Tiara and then swap out Matcha afterwards. And then I realized another thing, is that for Lemon Dragon, we are no longer able to void the Light and Greed Absorb. So what we could do is we could either substitute Kagimian, or we could actually just go as is, because if we're going to be playing like that, then we might be able to just stall out the Light and Greed Absorb from the Lemon Dragon. Which is honestly fine as well. So Kagimian is providing 4 skill boosts. And spawn roulettes on top orb, and then 2 times move time for 1 turn. Because we already have Tachibana for the kill board on the raw draw floor, and because Tachibana also hits super hard herself, any DPS check that we run into is going to be super easy. Matcha also deals very high personal damage too. And both of these units basically revolve around having quad attributes, so we don't need to have perfect attribute coverage. So in this case, we actually could afford to toss Cecilia for Uraka again. But I don't really want to do that because Cecilia... Kagemian also provides the 2 seconds of move time and the roulette, so we're just gonna go with this. We could do some experimenting by just running Uruka instead. Like, these 2 unit slots are very flexible in what we can do. So it's fine if we just experiment a little bit. In fact, I think we will. But yeah, in terms... Okay, so we basically have the core units settled. And just in case, I'm going to put Uruka at the very top over here, just as a substitute, just in case. Oops. This is a mental note. We're going to put this here. And... yeah, because Uruka can take 4 skill boosts. She has a fairly low personal damage. But because of her skill charges in her evolved form, she can also be a fairly reliable board converter up every like 6 turns. But if we're gonna be going for a board converter that's available 6 turns, then Kaguya is vastly superior just because you can use spinners to your advantage. So I think this is the better play. We will miss out on the attribute Void, but we may be able to work around that as well if we put attribute Absorb Void on Tachibana. So I will tentatively put this here, but the reason why this is very tentative, and if we were to put attribute Absorb, then we would be swapping out the unit position so that Tachibana would be at the very end, so that our blue sub-attribute is the last thing to hit. So if we want something like this to happen, then this is when we're going to be wanting to reference some other dungeon guide, because we want specific numbers. We want to see if we can actually kill the Lemon Dragon in 1 turn with the Tachibana sub-attribute, and we also want to find out if we can actually kill the Slime Knight in 1 turn past his 90% shield. Killing the Slime Knight in 1 turn is actually like way less important, just because of the fact that it's not very dangerous, and he spawns like spinners, so that's just really easy to kill on the following turn anyways. So the most important thing is whether or not this sub-attribute Void is actually going to make a difference or not. Because this sub-attribute, this attribute Absorb Void. This attribute Absorb Void also multiplies the damage cap by 1.5 times for Tachibana, so her main and sub-attributes can hit for 3 billion each. So that's something that we might want to check out. So in this case, we're going to want to check out the dungeon info for Raw Dragon Descended. Now, I don't have the name of it in Japanese, so Raw Dragon Descended blogging llama. And is there a Sky Azora link to this dungeon? No, there is not. Okay, so in that case, we're gonna just search up jankly the difficulty of the dungeon and Raw Dragon. Do I have a Japanese IME installed? I do not. Dragon. There's an equal sign in there too, huh? Yeah, there is. And this is more of this. Okay, so take this, Sky Azora, Raw Dragon, and we'll search up the dungeon difficulty. And this should give us a direct link to the dungeon. We could just use another site as well. Okay, this doesn't tell you the exact numbers. Other than how much damage this guy does, I think. Yeah. Yeah, it does not tell you the exact damage numbers. Okay, so let's check out this. It might be this one. Oh god. Can we find it through this? I don't think so. Let's use an alternative search instead. There it is. Nope. This is a news post for it. I think this is it. Yeah. Okay, yeah, this is the utility that we need. Okay, so let's translate this over. So Lemon Dragon has 2.2 billion HP. And Tachibana can easily clear that with by herself with a sub attribute that should be hitting for 3 billion. So this this attribute absorption latent would actually solve our problems on this floor. So that does work. And in terms of killing the Slime Knight, it has 1.8 billion HP with a 90% shield for 1 turn. So we are gonna have to take 2 turns to kill it because we won't be able to output like 18 billion damage in 1 turn. At most, we can do like around 10, I think, with the scene that we have right now. So fine, a 2-turn kill is completely a-okay, and the boss is basically, yeah. So light raw dragon only has 3.8 billion HP. So that means after we solve the puzzle, pretty much any single we can basically just murder it like several times over with how much damage we're bringing on this team. So another handy utility that this team can actually give you is we can actually just guesstimate how much damage that this team is able to output by running it in this. So basically, if you have a team like this, then we want to pop Matcha. Maybe not. I guess we're gonna have to swap the 2 positions. So let's do that. Matcha, reincarnated raw. Let's give her back the skill boost. Okay, so in a scenario like this, let's see how much damage we can actually output. So, wait, what's Matcha's leader skill again? So Matcha's leader skill is reduces damage taken by 65% and adds 2 combos when 3+ attack attributes attack at once, and 21 times attack and inflicts 1 damage with 5+ linked orbs. So we just need to make a match of 5+ linked orbs, and that's fine. So with that said, let's check it out. So we want Tachibana. We want to see if Tachibana, how much damage this team can normally deal with regular board solves. So in the case of a regular board solve, this actually does not that much. Oh, I didn't match a block of 5. What's Raw Dragon's leader skill? This is also pretty important. We have to get both actives. So 2.5 times HP and attack for god types, and 3 to 8 times attack when 5 to 6, including heal attributes attack at once. How good are we on god typing? Tachibana's god typing, Matcha's god typing, Tiara should be dragon. Kogimyan is also god typing, and Ra is also god typing. So we inadvertently actually got a near perfect god typing team, so that's cool. We don't need this 2.5 times attack typing for god type on Tiara, because Tiara is gonna hit for way too much damage to begin with. So let's try matching 5 attributes then. Actually this team We're missing blue, but should still be fine otherwise. Why does Tachibana not hit that hard? Or is it because her... Okay, so Tachibana's... Oh, I guess without a cross, she doesn't actually hit for that hard. So let's try that again. Da, 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 da. That time it didn't match greens. Okay, for the sake of testing this out, because matching in matching in game feels very different from this. So we want to try to make crosses for light and hearts, but even if we don't, I believe Tiara, so long as we have matches of green, I think Tiara is strong enough to basically just kill the floors by herself. I think. Yeah, Tiara by herself easily hits 2 billion on main and almost 2 billion on sub attributes just by getting the leader skill activations off. But if you were to throw in a cross, then how much more damage does that do? So like this. And then now Tachibana is the one hitting for 2 billion. So there is damage potential, but if we want to make sure that she kills with her sub attribute on Lemon Dragon floor, then she needs to hit for 8 billion. I mean, she needs to hit for 2.2 billion with her blue sub attribute. Okay, so that's actually fine because we already know that we're going to be using Matcha on the Lemon Dragon swapping floor. And Matcha's active skill multiplies the team god type's damages by 6 times. So long as Tachibana is able to hit for anything over like 400 million on her sub attribute with a cross, then we're in the money pretty much. So in a case of like this, even without... Yeah. Yeah, this team is super strong. Okay, yeah, this team shouldn't suffer in terms of damage. So that's basically the way that I would start to build a team from scratch and basically just do my theory crafting experimentation and also test out the team's damage and stuff like that in game. There are other utilities you can use to basically test out your team's damage, but such as using pad damage calculator. There are other tutorials on how to use that tool as well, where you can basically just set up your team and then input exactly how many of what orbs are you're going to be clearing, and then it basically gives you a rundown on how much damage your team is able to put out. But for the sake of this tutorial, I think that's going to be most of a wrap for the team building aspect. And this is basically what I'm going to be running for my Raw Dragon clears. And when Raw Dragon comes up, then I might record a couple of runs of it and basically showcase how everything comes together. But if you see me with a Raw Dragon in the next week, hopefully we get a Raw Dragon spawn next week, sometime within this week. But yeah, by then that means that I've already cleared it. So there are other sections that I wanted to cover for today as well. That was the main portion of today's stream, though, getting the team building components out of the way. And I will do a write-up on my... actually, no, I'll just link to a timestamp of this, of the VOD on how I basically did the Raw Dragon team building from scratch as well. So now that you're also at this point in the game and you have basically figured out how to build a Swiss Army knife type of team, you have a lot of options on dungeons you can clear. So your stamina is basically like super valuable at this point because you can get a lot of resources. So for coins, you're going to want to clear out 8-player dungeons every single month. 8-player dungeons gives you access to rainbow medals. It gives you whatchamacallit. It gives you rainbow medals, it gives you gold, it gives you a couple of rolls, and it also gives you like 10 stones every month. There's no reason not to do it, and everybody's on equalized teams, so it's a good way to just get some puzzle practice in. There's no downsides to losing either. You get points either way, whether you win or lose. And it's not like there's like a ranking mode for AP or anything anyway, so just run it. There's no downsides. You just have to run it enough. And it also costs like 10 stamina per run as well, so it's also like super easy. So yeah, there's also limited time dungeons, such as the King Diamond Dragon Invade, if you want to get more coins. But usually, if you run 8p, most players will probably be fine without having to actively search for other coin sources. Especially for new players, where you're gonna be limited more on the number of Super Snow Globe Dragons and units to Super Limit Break rather than the gold. Another thing that you're going to want to do is also clear up monthly quests and Pat Pass dungeons if you have it. Don't forget about those. For Super Snow Globe Dragons, you can run limited time dungeons such as Snow Globe Dragon Rush. I think that's actually one of the better places to get it for at this point in the game. If there aren't event exchanges that can give you a Snow Globe Dragon instead. There's also the monthly quests. There's event exchanges. Alter Arena 4 and Alter Arena 2 are also good ways to get Snow Globe Dragons. Arena 4 and Alter Arena 2 with a pretty modern Swiss Army knife team should be pretty easy to tackle. Arena 4 and Alter Arena 2 are basically the same dungeon, very similar to each other. Yeah, you might find that Alter Arena 2 has a little bit more mechanics in the form of a couple of additional spawns, and the enemies will hit harder, but if you have a modern team that's able to tank like hundreds of thousands of damage, then it should be a walk in the park. Pluses. Clearing out normals and dungeons and technical dungeons should give you a decent chunk. There's also story mode, which I forgot to add over here. If you haven't finished off the story mode, then yeah, there's like 5 chapters of story modes that give you like 10,000 plus points each if you clear them. So that's like 50,000 plus points up for grabs, and this is going to be very important for you if you're going to be rolling for Super Awakenings and stuff like that. Like, I'm personally out of plus points as well because I was building the Odin Dragon team and I was rolling Super Awakenings, but I'm probably going to be clearing out a couple of those story dungeons as well, and then rerolling my Super Awakenings for my units like Matcha, which is going to be very, very nice. And yeah, Super Plus Points Cave is also nice, and Event Arenas, if capable, like the current Event Arena is for the Heroine Dungeon, where every clear gives you 500 plus points, but the dungeon is difficult if you don't know what you're getting yourself into. So enter it with caution. It is not an easy dungeon. It does help significantly if most of the units that you run are actually from the Heroine Rem. But other than that, if you didn't roll in this rem a lot and you don't have good units for it, then it's gonna be a very tough uphill climb. Just warning you. So Ps and skill ups. The main ways you can get them are from arenas, collab exchanges, and at this moment when you're a new player, S ranking dungeons is also a really good way to get a pretty free rainbow P for just 50 stamina or less, depending on a dungeon. And not only that, it's also a really good place for you to get Diamond Dragon Fruits and Trigon Masks as well. Because otherwise, they're fairly rare. Because they're usually gated by monthly quests or very low drop rates and like endgame dungeons and stuff like that. So either very low drop rates, monthly quests, or they're in very endgame dungeons. Yeah. Like Rainbow Dragon Fruits, if you try to get them in Thursday Dungeon, I believe it's only like a 1 or 2% chance for it to appear. So it's a lot of stamina before you can end up getting one. So just S-rank dungeons instead, and just be careful with how you spend them. Latents, you can get them from event exchanges, monthly quests, arenas, and I believe Call of 2 for stat related ones. There's also the ad rem, which can also give you random assortments of latents. And it's also worth noting that many players are willing to do trades, one-to-one trades for materials with multiple attributes like Ps, gems, and latents. So make a lot of friends in game and try to look for trade for what you need with members of the community if you're falling short on a certain attribute. And rainbow medals, the best places to get rainbow medals are going to be from 8p. There's a lot of rainbow medals and black medals you can get from AP just by playing it a lot, so I would highly, highly, highly recommend you get started on that if you haven't already. At the minimum, I would recommend going for 2,000 event points every single month, just so that you can cap out on all the event rewards. And it only cycles once, and the dungeon cycles once a month, so you have the whole month to do it. If you're a really good player, it should only take you like 20 to 30 runs to basically get the max out. But even if you're not a great player, and if you're just even if you're not a player and you're just getting started out, it shouldn't take you that long, so long as you're playing during times where not a lot of players queue. The reason for that is being in 8P dungeons, the matches only start when there's a minimum of 2 players in the room, and when you're playing during a time when not a lot of players are queuing up, it's very easy to find yourself in a lobby with only 2 players, and the bots are basically very low in terms of power level. So long as you're trying your best and matching as many boards as you can usually find yourself in a top 2 position. And another way that you can get around doing this is near the middle of the month when not a lot of players are queuing, because most players are queuing at the very start and at the very end. If you find an off time to queue 8P, you can actually queue it with another person by finding them in like the Hyperion Discord or like the Pad Discord server, and just queue together at the right times at the same time, and then you can just grind the event out, just the 2 of you. Because if you're in first place, you get 100 points, and if you get second place, you get 80 points. So it's not difficult to get 2,000 points, and especially because each run takes like 10 stamina, you can easily bang this out in the course of like a day or 2. Yeah, very, very easy. And another way you can get rainbow medals is basically by clearing monthly quest dungeons. If you clear all stages of the novice dungeon set, and then you usually get 1 rainbow medal, and if you clear all the dungeons in the expert set, you get 2. But the expert set is probably going to be a lot harder for new players that don't have as developed boxes, so try to finish the novice dungeons at least, and try to clear out level 6 in the expert dungeons, because they oftentimes come with whatchamacallit, a anniversary Tamadra as well, which is worth like several tens of thousands, if not like 100,000 monster points. So let me just save this again. Okay. Seems like my internet is hiccuping up again, unfortunately. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to cover is how to solve boards. So the skill test floor, the only skill test floor that you're going to be running into, which is in the arenas, is going to be Lakshmi, which is very easy because you only have to worry about... because it's very straightforward. All you have to do is just clear the jammers on the board. She spawns jammers a couple times on the board, and all you have to do is just clear them. It's very straightforward. Now, is my internet gonna work? Okay, and other than that, yeah, so erase all jammers. I say just look for easy triples and quads. And leaders with fixed move time can also make this floor easier because your leaders aren't bound. It's only you're only awoken bound and skill bound. So if you have a leader skill that gives you like 15 seconds of move time, then it will persist throughout the puzzle. So that's gonna make it a lot easier for you. So when blinded, you don't need to uncover all the orbs. Just figure out a solution, and following the path can be easier than revealing the whole board and having to solve the puzzle in a few seconds you have left. So one way that a lot of people deal with fully blinded boards is basically just like swipe an orb across the whole screen to basically make it a clear board. But you only have to clear jammers, and jammers have a different silhouette from the rest of the from your standard like circles and squares. So just solve the puzzle, and with the remaining time you have, clear the remainder of the board by just like swiping your finger around the orbs that aren't jammers. Basically, just use the remaining time to clear away as many dark orbs as you can, so that on the following floor, when you get the final test where your move time is reduced and you have to match another set of jammers, you don't accidentally miss one to a because it was blinded. Like, it can happen. So to avoid that from happening, just make the most out of your time. And you can also solve the puzzle and then clear blinds with the remaining time. Yeah, so just avoid touching jammers so that you don't break your solution, but you can basically just clear out the rest of the jammers on the blinds on the board by just swiping your finger over them. And also be careful of the jammers near the edge. Like, it's very easy to just look at a board like this and think that it's solved, but the jammer at the very corner is not a part of any solution. It's not in any 3 or 4 match, so it's not going to be matched, and you can end up dying to weird blob-looking things like this. Just because it looks like it's a pretty solid blob does not actually mean that it is, so do take care to make sure that you avoid incidents like this from happening. And the other type of boards and leaders that you might be interested in are cross leads, where you basically have 2 different types. So you have scaling cross leads, where on a 6x5 you might want to triple cross you might want to try to fit as many crosses as you can on a board like this. In that case, there are 2 ways you can do it. One is the way that you can one is with a setup and a cascade. So the top 2 boards are basically showing how you can set up a board like this and what the end result looks like on the right. So on the left hand side, if you decide to set up a cascade board like this, the way that you would normally set it up is you would make a cross at the top. You make a cross at the top right, like this, or the top left. All of these board solutions can be mirrored horizontally. So yeah, you make a cross, and then you make a match at the very bottom over here. And you try to gather as many of the same attribute orbs as you can where the heart orbs are. And now this board setup can also be it can also be an L as well if you decide to extend the Mortal Poison match on the bottom with an L at the very end over here. But you don't have to. And the way that you would normally solve this board is basically by just following this path, and you end up with a solution like this. So what this does is you get an L unlock at the bottom right corner. You get a cross over here. You get another green cross. You get another cross over here in the middle. And you get one final cross with this light falling into shape. So what this looks like is this. Puzzle practice. Oops. Actually, we can just do it with a free board. So for example, we have 5 reds. We have like 7 reds. We have 5. Okay, so let's make it with this. So for example, just make columns of what you need. So we have our 3 columns over here. Now we move on to basically making a cross of dark like this. We make our final match at the bottom over here. And we don't have enough orbs to basically make a combo over here, but it doesn't really matter. And we basically start from here. We follow this path. We go up like this. Whoops, I messed it up. Wait, what the heck did I do? We follow the path, and we go up like this. And so there were basically 3 crosses like that. The one small downside to this is the fact that the light cross over here. Oh, I wasn't even showing it on the board. Okay, so let me try it again. So we have a board set up like this. We set up our greens, we set up our blues, and we set up our darks over here. So this time we can't actually make another cross at the top over here, but instead we can just solve it regularly. So over here, we follow the path. Yeah, the annoying thing about this is the fact that you can actually skyfall, you can actually cascade improperly, and if you do, you end up blobbing one of your crosses away. Okay, so this is a better example of what's possible. So in a case like this, you follow the path. There's a green cross on the top right, there's a red cross on the bottom, and there's a light match on the left. And you can skyfall this blue over here. But this cascaded blue can very easily have an extra like spare blue orb like trailing it or following it, and that might actually break the cross. So while this might be easier to set up, if you are capable, I would recommend you go for a non-cascading version of that board instead. Because while it's easier to set up, because you only have to match, like, you only have to make, like, 3 columns of an orb, and then you only have to match, like, half of a board on the right-hand side, or the left-hand side, depending on how you see it. And because the remaining crosses are basically just, like, a flick away, it can be tempting to basically just continue to go for this, but if you need damage reliably, then I would recommend you go for a non-cascade setup. And I show off the various forms of non-cascade setups on the bottom. So the one on the left over here is one that doesn't support L's, but the one on the right does. But generally you just want to start off with a cross, a match, and then another cross. And then you fit in the last cross and then L. And you make an L and then you fit in the last cross afterwards. And if you want to be fancy, you can also fit in some extra more. You can also fit in some more cascaded combos. Like these heart orbs can also be cascaded into an extra combo, and these jammers can also be cascaded into an extra combo as well. But it's definitely not mandatory if you can't do it. Generally, with scaling cross leaders, if you because crosses generally add to the combo count as well. If you have 3 crosses like this, then it's like every cross is usually worth like at least like 3 combos. So you would still be able to hit over 10 combos if you were to solve like this. Maybe like 3, 6, 9 plus 2 extra combos, so it's gonna be like 11 combos. So most combo shields are gonna be pretty easy to deal with in a form like this. But it can be a little bit confusing to work your way around it if you're not used to making weird shapes on your board. Yeah, so it comes with experience. And beyond that, the other type of board that you're going to be starting to be introduced to are 7x6s. Now, 7x6s are arguably easier to solve than 5x6, 6x5s because you have the option of just stacking every single one of your combos, like this bicolor board with red and blues that I have over here. And the way that you solve this board is basically just by starting on one end and just solving your way through it, and it's very easy to do, and you basically can't get lost doing it. So this is basically the way that I would recommend most people learn to solve 7x6s. And then, yeah, if you're usually solving 6x5s, the fundamentals carry over to solving 7x6s. One major difference is your ability to pack 2 vertical combos in a single column, which makes bicolor boards and regular board solving very easy if you work from one direction to another. You also have the luxury of being able to fit in 2 3x3s and a 3x6 space. So, like, you can fit in 2 3x3s in, like, vertically on top of each other. So this could be something like a 2 VDP or like a VDP and a super follow-up attack if you pop up board changer. So the thing about that is kind of like this. So puzzle practice. Actually, let's go into team. Let's go over here. I don't care about this team. Let's put in a Zella. Oops. Oops, 7x6. So basically what I mean by that is you're able to stack in something like this. So that you can basically get like a super follow-up attack on the left-hand side and a VDP together, and then the rest of the board you can basically just solve as you would any other 7x6. Now, one thing to note is there are different ways you can actually solve boards like this too. Like if you want an L unlock and a VDP, you can solve it like this. Or if you want like a green L for a board unlock, you can solve it like this. Or if you really don't care about anything, you can also just solve it like this. There's like different ways you can do it, so it doesn't really matter how you approach it, but yeah, that's basically the different ways you can approach a 7x6. And for those that are yeah, learn to be fast on a 7x6 comes in very handy during ranking dungeons and will continue to become more important as units that temporarily change your board to 7x6 are starting to show their faces in top teams. So you're going to want to get used to solving 7x6s, whether it just be just throwing yourself into it and like endless corridors, or by running 7x6 leaders. You're going to want to get used to it. And for 7x6 TP, yeah, but ranking dungeon discussions are going to be coming up next week because it requires a completely different mindset and a different unit set as well. So, yeah, next week when we talk about endgame. Yeah. And for 7x6 TPA spams, players have different ways you can set up their boards. Ateli players will be used to the standard way on the left. This is basically by working your TPAs by going in a circle. The way that you would normally do this is basically by... you start off with like a horizontal match, and then you make another horizontal match, and then you start making vertical matches. You make 3 of these. And then you continue making horizontal matches, and then you make vertical matches, and that's basically how it goes. But don't do that. Don't mess up your combos like that. Yeah, this is messed up. Kind of like this. Yeah. But the other way is on the second board, the main takeaway. But this is for our tele teams. Or teams that don't really require you to only match a specific type. But the ones that do, like Kaishu teams, because you're basically converting your orbs away into being only like 3 attributes, it's very... If you try to do it the Ateli way, you're gonna find yourself in a spot where you're gonna have a lot of overlaps. You're gonna end up making like blobs of 8 by accident a lot, so... In that case, I would recommend doing it the second way. It starts off in a similar way, but you're going to want to count your orbs before you start matching your board. The way that I would normally do it is find the attribute with like 2 TPAs. Okay, I should probably do this with Kaishu, actually. It's probably easier. I want the evoed version. So if you pop Kaishu in a place like this, then you end up finding yourself in a spot where you don't want to overlap as much as possible. So I'm roughly counting the orbs, and I see that there's basically like 8, there's 9 blue orbs, so I'm just going to go with that as the main divider between the TPAs that I have. And the second one that I have the least of is gonna be hearts, I believe, which I also have like 10 of. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, so in that case, I'm gonna assume that my blues are gonna be the ones to split the TPAs apart, and my hearts are gonna be... Okay, yeah, so the one you have the least of, you can use it as a divider to make sure that none of your other TPAs are basically matching. So if I were to do it like this, then I have my hearts like this. And because this blue TPA is basically splitting everything up, I can basically afford to just solve like this. I mean, because that heart is basically splitting everything up, and you can also just go like this as well. In a case like this, because the blues are unnecessary, you can actually just use them to just separate things. Separate the TPs as needed. Basically figure out like a trash orb that you don't really need, and basically use that to just divvy everything up. In the case of Kaishu, it can be easier if you like if you have exactly 8 of something that you can put into like the red orb slot where I marked it out on this thing. But you don't have, it doesn't have to be anything strict like that. Like the blue thing over here is basically just whatever you have left over. Like in this case, we have, I'm gonna be using like lights as the one to split these up together. And the blues are basically gonna be the trash orbs that I use to split everything up as again. So kind of like this. And because of that, kind of like this. Yeah. So although there are like more optimal ways to do it, I use the blues to basically just be the trash orbs that can use to like split up whatever it's needed. And whatever I don't have a lot of TPAs of, I use it to split it along the top over here and along the middle over here, so that I can basically make vertical matches like over here, and more vertical matches over here, more horizontal matches over here. It's just easier to solve that way. But as you play, you're gonna probably find your own ways of solving this. This is basically just a starting point, and it also depends on how much move time you have as well. Like if you don't have a lot of move time, then you might end up finding yourself going for slightly more jankier solutions by just eyeballing it completely from the start. Maybe just like spamming horizontal ones instead. Like this. It's not the prettiest solve, but in the end, the amount of TPs you can get is still maxed out this way anyways. Like it's, well, save for like one light TP that I kind of missed out on, but yeah, usually these teams deal more than enough damage for capping out, even if you miss out on a 1 or 2 TPs in the end anyway, so it's generally fine. And the other thing that you might want to keep an eye out for is basically with how popular brick teams are basically getting. Another thing that you might want to work on is basically working with bricks and spinners. So bricks and spinners are actually like super easy. There's only a couple things that I would probably recommend you keep an eye out for. Whenever the spinners in the okay, let's just say that you're running a Shiva Dragon team, right? So every single turn you're able to create a set of 12 fire orbs at the very bottom. And you don't know where the spinner is going to be coming in, from whether it be from like enemies that are trying to debuff you, or if it's going to be like an active that you pop yourself. Because Gunji board is actually like a really popular one, which spawns a roulette for 9 turns. In that case, if the spinner lands on anywhere where the hard orbs are, then that's basically like a freebie, where you're free to just pull out any orbs that you want without any risk of disturbing your fire brick that you have at the start. At the very bottom over here. So this is basically like the ideal 3 rows where your spinner could start, and when that happens, you're basically free to pull out any fire orbs you want and any hard orbs you want, so you can basically have free reign for however long that spinner lasts. It's the best case scenario and it's the easiest to work around, as you can easily just make a match of like fire in a row where the spinner isn't, and then use the rest of the space to basically just make hard matches. So it's very free. The other place where it can spawn is where the lock row is, so the second row from the bottom. In this case, my recommendation is to start off with a fire orb in that position and to end your solve at with the fire orb in that position. So that way you don't because spinners don't change the orb that you're currently holding. If you start and end with an orb at that position, then you guarantee that you're gonna at least end the turn with a brick, so that you won't die because you accidentally didn't make a brick. So that's basically my personal recommendation. So start and end with the brick. Start and end with the piece on the brick. Now, the other most annoying place where the spinner can spawn is at the very bottom. For that one, or when there's multiple spinners on the board, you're just gonna have to get used to solving around spinners and just learning to time it so that your solve is basically so that you drop you'll learn to solve fast so that you can basically drop the orb the next time that the rotation happens to land on the orb that you need, and in this case fire. So in the case of multiple spinners, I would also recommend that you basically synchronize the spinners into whatever orb that you need, whether it be fire orbs, heal orbs, or like a mix of both. For example, if you're going to be synchronizing for fire orbs, just hold the orbs on the spinners to make sure that they all line up, and then solve as is. And for the cases where you want to pull out some heal orbs, make sure that the spinners that are on the brick are fire when the spinners at the top are basically hard orbs. And then you can basically just solve around them. It becomes a lot easier that way. So that's my personal recommendation for solving bricks with spinners. And you're gonna find that learning to play around with spinners and with brick teams is gonna be incredibly useful because of how popular Shiva Dragon is. And with the nature of this game, units like Shiva Dragon are kind of I don't want to say timeless because there's always gonna be better dungeons to farm and stuff like that, but it's one way to think about it is dungeons don't necessarily get harder. So if you have a team that can reliably clear something very quickly, then chances are you can probably just keep that team for the longest time. Like I've been using the same, like for one of my endgame dungeons for Shiro Realm 2, for ASR 2, I've been using the same Daytona team for like over a year. It was only until recently where I didn't need to farm pluses anymore that I stopped running that team. But yeah, if you have a good team that can clear a dungeon very quickly with minimal effort, then there's no reason to try to. There's no reason for you to not use it anymore, is what I'm saying. It's not. It's yeah. The dungeons don't get nerfed or anything like. Don't get buffed or anything like that. So it's fine. Um. And I think that was pretty much all the stuff that I wanted to cover. I went a little bit over. I wanted to actually end this lecture at like 12, but because of the technical difficulties that we ran into, it was kind of hard to do that. So yeah, I understand that there's a lot of like drop frames and stuff like that. I don't know exactly what was causing them. So my apologies for that. Hopefully, if you missed anything, you can check out the VOD later. I'll be piecing everything together into one single video so that it's gonna be easier to watch. And yeah, that's gonna be it for me today. With all the technical difficulties going on, I'm kind of bummed out myself the fact that it went this way. But yeah. So if you have any problems, if you have any questions that you'd like answered, then feel free to just message me either on the Reddit post, or you can also just join my Discord server where I just hang out there a lot, or the Hyperion Discord server as well. Um, and yeah, if you'd like to see the final part coming up next week, then please consider following and subscribing to my YouTube channels, and I will see you guys next time.